Welcome. Before we begin tonight's story, I have one question. Where are you listening from tonight? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy falling asleep to these calm but chilling tales, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Now, close your eyes and let the forest take you. Have you ever felt like the mountain was watching you? I know exactly how that feels. Believe me, I know. After 12 years of patrolling these slopes, pulling bodies from crevasses, finding tents torn apart by winds strong enough to blow you away, you start to understand something. Here, your plans, or how experienced you are, don't matter. It doesn't hate you. It just is. Sometimes, that's the most terrifying thing of all. I'm Miles Donovan, a park ranger at Mount Rainier National Park. Let me tell you right now, it's not like you see in the movies. We don't spend our days taking perfect Instagram photos for tourists or rescuing baby deer. Most of our work involves routine paperwork, trail inspections, and preventing people from doing stupid things that could get them killed. But every now and then, something happens that reminds you why this job exists. Something that makes you realize how small and fragile you are, how easily the mountain could swallow you up and never let you out again. This story starts on a Tuesday in late October. The kind of day where the sky looks like bruised metal and you can taste snow in the air even though it hasn't started falling yet. I was finishing up my morning patrol when Sarah Kemper, our station chief, radioed me. Her voice had that edge to it, the one that meant something was wrong. "Miles, we've got a potential situation. Solo hiker Jared Holt, 32 years old, experienced climber. He checked in yesterday morning before heading up Summit Trail. Said he'd radio when he reached Camp Muir. That was supposed to be last night. We haven't heard from him." I felt that familiar knot form in my stomach. Summit Trail isn't a walk in the park, and I'm not using that phrase lightly. It's a brutal, technical route that takes you from paradise at 500 to 400 feet all the way up to the summit at 14,411 feet. In good conditions, with perfect weather and the right gear, it's challenging. In October, with storm systems rolling in off the Pacific and temperatures dropping below zero at night, it's a death trap. What was his experience level? I asked, already knowing the answer would be irrelevant. Experience means nothing when the mountain decides it's your turn. Extensive. He's summited Rainier 4 times, plus Denali, Baker, and Hood. He filed a detailed route plan, had all the right permits. Everything by the book. That made it worse somehow. The experienced ones always think they know better. They push limits, take calculated risks, trust their instincts, and sometimes those instincts get them killed. "I'm heading back to the station," I said. "Let's pull his file and see what we're working with." The drive back took 20 minutes, and I spent every second of it running through scenarios in my head. Best case, his radio had died and he was hunkered down somewhere waiting out bad weather. Worst case? Well, I tried not to think about the worst case. Not yet. Back at the station, Sarah had Jared's file spread across her desk. Photo ID showed a lean guy with sun-weathered skin and the kind of eyes that suggested he'd seen plenty of sunrises from high places. His route plan was meticulous. Timestamps for every checkpoint, emergency protocols, backup GPS coordinates. This wasn't some weekend warrior who'd watched too many YouTube videos. This was someone who knew what he was doing. "Last contact was yesterday at 0847 hours, Sarah said, tapping the log sheet. He was at Pebble Creek, about 2 miles into the trail. Said conditions were good, visibility clear, wind moderate. Planned to reach Camp Muir by 1600 hours and radio in." I checked my watch. It was now 10:15 hours the following day. That meant he'd been out of contact for approximately 25 hours. In mountain time, that's an eternity. "Weather?" I asked. Sarah pulled up the meteorological data on her computer. Storm front moved in faster than predicted. Started around 1900 hours yesterday. Heavy snow, winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour at higher elevations. It cleared around 0400 this morning, but there's another system coming in tonight. I studied the topographic map on the wall, tracing the route with my finger. Summit Trail cuts through some of the most exposed terrain on the mountain. There are sections where you're essentially walking along a ridge with 1,000-foot drops on either side. If you get caught in a whiteout up there, if you lose the trail even for a minute, you're done. We need to get a team up there, I said. Now. Sarah nodded. I've already contacted Emily Rodriguez. She's assembling a search team. They'll be ready to deploy in 30 minutes. Emily Rodriguez was our best SAR coordinator, search and rescue, for those who don't know the lingo. If anyone could find Jared, it was her team. But I couldn't shake this feeling, this sense that we were already too late. Don't ask me how I knew. Call it intuition. Call it pattern recognition from too many failed rescues. Whatever it was, it sat in my gut like a stone. The briefing was quick and efficient. Emily had pulled together a 6-person team, all experienced mountaineers who knew the terrain. The plan was straightforward. Ascend Summit Trail to Camp Muir, following Jared's planned route, checking every logical place he might have stopped or taken shelter. Radio contact every 30 minutes. If weather deteriorated, immediate evacuation. Miles, you're with me on point, Emily said. Tom, you and Jackson take the flanks. Keep your spacing tight but not too tight. Last thing we need is someone else getting lost up there. Tom Riggs gave a curt nod. He was older than the rest of us, pushing 60, but he had more mountain experience than everyone else combined. If he was worried, he didn't show it. That's what I always appreciated about Tom. He treated every rescue the same way. Focused, methodical, emotionless. It was the only way to survive this job without losing your mind. We geared up and started the ascent at 1100 hours. The lower sections of Summit Trail are deceptively easy, winding through alpine meadows and scattered trees. It's beautiful country if you're in the mood to appreciate it. I wasn't. My mind was locked onto the task ahead, running through every possible scenario, every place Jared might be. The first checkpoint was Pebble Creek, where he'd made his last radio contact. We reached it in just under an hour. The creek was partially frozen, and fresh snow covered most of the surrounding area. Emily and I searched for any signs, boot prints, disturbed snow, anything that might tell us Jared had been here recently. We found nothing. Radio's cold, Emily said, lowering her handheld unit. No signal from his emergency beacon either. That was bad. Modern emergency beacons are designed to transmit even in the worst conditions. If we weren't picking up anything, it meant either his beacon was damaged, buried under snow, or turned off. None of those options were good. We pressed on. The trail got steeper, the terrain more technical. At around 7,000 feet, we hit the snow line properly, and the world transformed into a monochrome landscape of white and gray. Visibility dropped to about 50 yards. The wind picked up, not dangerous yet, but enough to make conversation difficult. Every 30 minutes, we stopped and radioed back to base. No contact. Continuing ascent. Same message, over and over. I could hear the tension building in Sarah's voice with each transmission, though she tried to hide it. She knew the statistics as well as I did. The longer someone's missing on the mountain, the lower their chances of survival. After 24 hours, those chances drop to less than 50%. After 48, they're in single digits. At 8,200 feet, we found something. Tom spotted it first, his sharp eyes picking out a detail the rest of us had missed. A piece of orange fabric caught on a rock outcropping. It was part of a stuff sack, the kind you use to compress sleeping bags. The fabric was frozen stiff, and there were no other signs of disturbance around it. "Could be his," Emily said, examining it carefully. "Orange is a common color, but this is quality gear. Matches the brand listed in his equipment manifest." I looked around, trying to understand how it had gotten here. Had he stopped to reorganize his pack? Had something torn loose in the wind? The fabric was ripped, not cut, which suggested force rather than intentional removal. "Let's keep moving," I said. "This tells us he made it at least this far. That's something." But privately, I was becoming more and more certain that we weren't going to find Jared alive. There was something about this whole situation that felt wrong. Not supernatural, nothing like that. Just off. Like when you hear a sound in your house that doesn't quite fit, and your brain knows something's wrong before you can articulate what it is. The terrain got more brutal as we climbed. By 9,500 feet, we were moving slowly, deliberately, every step requiring concentration. The wind had increased to the point where it was hard to hear each other even when shouting. Snow began falling again, not heavy, but enough to reduce visibility further. We reached Anvil Rock at 15:30 hours, well behind schedule. This was a designated rest point, a cluster of volcanic boulders that provided some shelter from the wind. We huddled together, checking our gear and warming our hands. "We're burning daylight," Tom said, his voice muffled by his face mask. "If we don't find him in the next 2 hours, we'll have to turn back. Can't risk being up here after dark." He was right, of course. The mountain doesn't care about your determination or your sense of duty. It doesn't care that there's someone out here who needs help. It only cares about physics, temperature, wind speed, the limitations of the human body. Push those limitations too far, and the mountain claims another victim. 2 more hours, Emily agreed. But we make it count. Miles, you and I will push ahead to Camp Muir. Tom, take the others and sweep the eastern approach. Radio contact every 15 minutes now. The team split up. Emily and I began the final push toward Camp Muir, located at 10,080 feet. This section of trail was particularly exposed, following a narrow ridge with precipitous drops on both sides. The snow was deeper here, wind-packed and treacherous. Each step required testing the ground ahead with your trekking pole, making sure you weren't about to plunge through a hidden crevasse. Camp Muir isn't really a camp in the traditional sense. It's a collection of stone shelters built into the mountain, used by climbers as a staging point for summit attempts. In good conditions, it's a bustling place. In weather like this, it's a desolate, wind-scoured hellscape that looks like something from another planet. We reached the camp at 16:45 hours. The main shelter was locked, which was standard for this time of year. Emily produced the master key, and we pushed inside. The interior was dark and cold, but at least it was out of the wind. We swept our headlamps across the space, checking every corner. Empty. "Damn it," Emily muttered. She keyed her radio. "Base, this is SAR-1. We've reached Camp Muir. No sign of the missing hiker. Repeat, no sign." Sarah's response crackled through. "Copy, SAR-1. Tom's team is reporting negative as well. I think you need to consider turning back. That storm system is moving faster than expected. You've got maybe 90 minutes before conditions become critical." I moved to the window, such as it was, really just a gap in the stone walls. Outside, I could see the weather deteriorating rapidly. The snow was falling heavier now, and the clouds were descending, beginning to obscure the peaks above us. Sarah was right. If we didn't leave soon, we'd be trapped up here ourselves. But something made me hesitate. Call it stubbornness, call it instinct, I don't know. I just had this feeling that we were missing something, that Jared was close by. You develop a sense for these things after enough years on the mountain. Sometimes you're wrong. Sometimes you're right. The trick is knowing the difference. Emily, give me 10 minutes, I said. I want to check the immediate area around the camp. She looked at me, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. Every instinct said we should be heading down already. But she trusted me, trusted that I wouldn't ask if I didn't have a reason. 10 minutes, she said. Not 1 second more. I stepped back outside into the maelstrom. The wind hit me like a physical force, and I had to lean into it to avoid being knocked over. Visibility was down to maybe 20 feet now. I activated my headlamp, though it didn't help much in the swirling snow. I moved in a systematic grid pattern around the camp, checking every depression in the snow, every shadow that might be a person or a tent. The cold was intense, penetrating through my layers despite the high-tech gear. My face felt numb where it was exposed. This was dangerous, pushing my limits. I knew that, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Jared was nearby. Then I saw it. About 30 yards north of the main shelter, barely visible through the snow, a dark shape that didn't match the natural contours of the mountain. At first I thought it might be a rock, but rocks don't have geometric angles. I keyed my radio. Emily, I've got something. 30 yards north of your position. Her response was immediate. On my way. I moved closer, and the shape resolved into something recognizable. A tent. Not a big mountaineering tent, but a lightweight solo shelter, designed for fast and light alpine climbing. It was partially buried in snow, the fabric frozen solid. The entrance flap was partially open, moving slightly in the wind. Emily appeared beside me, breathing hard from the quick scramble. Together, we approached the tent. My heart was pounding now, not from exertion but from what we might find inside. In situations like this, you hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. Often, you get the worst. "Jared?" I called out. No response. "Jared Holt, this is the National Park Service. If you can hear me, make some noise." Nothing but the wind. I knelt down and reached for the tent flap. My hands were shaking, and not from the cold. Emily positioned herself behind me, her headlamp adding to the illumination. I pulled the flap fully open and peered inside. The tent was empty. Or rather, it looked empty at first glance. But as my eyes adjusted to the dim interior, I saw that it wasn't abandoned. There was a sleeping bag still laid out as if someone had been using it. A small backpack in the corner. A portable stove, not currently lit, but with a fuel canister still attached. And there, mounted on the tent wall, a radio. It was still on. I could see the small LED indicator light glowing green. That's what made my blood run cold. The radio was on, transmitting, with its microphone keyed open. And from its small speaker, barely audible above the wind, came a single word, repeated over and over in a mechanical loop. "Wait, wait!" Emily heard it too. I could see her face go pale even in the dim light. "What the hell?" she whispered. I reached in and carefully extracted the radio, being mindful not to disturb anything else in the tent. It was a standard mountaineering unit, same model we used. The battery indicator showed about 40% remaining. I turned the volume up slightly, and that single word filled the space between us. Wait, it wasn't a recording, at least not in the traditional sense. The audio quality suggested it had been captured from a live transmission, then somehow set to loop. The voice was male, probably Jared's, though it was hard to be certain given the degraded quality and the single-word sample. But what really unsettled me was the tone. It wasn't panicked or desperate. It was calm, almost conversational, like he was asking someone to hold on a moment while he grabbed something from another room. "When was his last confirmed transmission?" Emily asked. I pulled out my phone, checking the notes I'd made from Sarah's briefing. "Yesterday at 0847 from Pebble Creek, but that doesn't mean he didn't make other transmissions we didn't receive. These radios have a range of maybe 5 miles in good conditions, less in terrain like this. Emily was examining the tent interior with her headlamp. Look at this. Everything's arranged too neatly. His pack is organized, the sleeping bag is laid out flat, not bunched up like someone had been sleeping in it. It's like he set up camp, arranged everything properly, and then just walked away. She was right. There was no sign of struggle, no indication of panic or emergency. If Jared had been injured or in distress, you'd expect to see medical supplies out, maybe bandages, signs that he'd been trying to treat himself. Instead, everything looked methodical, deliberate. I keyed my own radio. "Base, this is Miles. We found a tent we believe belongs to the missing hiker. He's not inside, but his gear is here. We've also found his radio, and it's transmitting a looped message. Single word, wait." There was a long pause before Sarah responded. I could almost hear her trying to process that information. "Say again, Miles. Did you say a looped message?" "Affirmative. The radio is on and transmitting. We're going to secure the site and the equipment as potential evidence, but we need to expand the search radius. He's on foot somewhere in this area." "Negative." Sarah's voice came back, firmer now. "Current conditions are too dangerous. You need to extract now. That storm system is on top of you. You've got maybe 30 minutes before you won't be able to descend safely." I looked at Emily. She nodded reluctantly. Sarah was right, of course. We couldn't help Jared if we became casualties ourselves. But leaving felt wrong, like we were abandoning him. "Copy that," I said. "We're securing the evidence and heading down. Can you get a helicopter up here at first light?" "Already requested. If the weather clears, they'll be airborne by 0700 hours." Emily and I worked quickly, photographing the tent from multiple angles, documenting the position of every item inside. I carefully placed the radio in an evidence bag, making sure to note the battery level and that it was still transmitting. We couldn't take the tent itself. It was too heavy, and moving it would compromise potential evidence. Instead, we marked its location with GPS coordinates and high-visibility flags. The descent was brutal. Visibility was near zero, and we were relying entirely on GPS and our knowledge of the trail. Tom's team had already started down, and we caught up with them at Anvil Rock. Nobody spoke much. What was there to say? We'd found Jared's camp, but not Jared, and that radio message kept playing in my head. Wait. Wait for what? Wait for help? Wait because he was coming back? Or was it something else, some message we weren't understanding? We reached the station at 2145 hours, exhausted, half frozen, and no closer to answers. Sarah had hot coffee waiting, and I've never been more grateful for caffeine in my life. The team debriefed quickly, each person contributing their observations, painting a clearer picture of what we'd found and, more importantly, what we hadn't. "I don't like this," Tom said, wrapping his hands around his coffee mug. 20-plus years I've been doing this, and I've never seen anything like it. People don't just vanish from sealed tents. They don't set up camp perfectly and then walk away into a storm. Could he have been delirious? One of the other team members suggested. Altitude sickness can cause confusion, irrational behavior. I shook my head. Possible, but unlikely at that elevation. Camp Muir is just over 10,000 feet. You need to be higher than that, usually above 12,000, before altitude sickness becomes a serious concern for experienced climbers. And according to his medical file, Jared had no history of altitude-related issues. "What about the radio message?" Emily asked. "How does something like that even happen? You can't accidentally set a radio to loop a single word." That was the question that bothered me most. I'd been thinking about it during the entire descent. Modern mountaineering radios don't have a loop function. They're designed for simple, direct communication. The only way to create what we'd heard would be to deliberately record a message and then play it back repeatedly, which would require additional equipment Jared supposedly didn't have. Sarah pulled up Jared's equipment manifest on her computer. According to his permit application, he had one radio, model SR-40. That's a basic unit, no recording capability, so either he had additional equipment he didn't declare, or someone else was involved. Or, Tom said quietly, we're not dealing with what we think we're dealing with. Everyone looked at him. Tom wasn't the type to make cryptic statements. Meaning what? I asked. Tom was silent for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I've heard stories over the years, things that happen on this mountain that don't quite add up, people who disappear in ways that don't make sense, equipment that malfunctions in ways it shouldn't. Hell, Miles, you've been here long enough. You must have heard some of the tales. I had, of course. Every ranger station has its ghost stories, its unexplained incidents that people talk about late at night when the wind is howling outside. But I'd always dismissed them as exactly that. Stories, embellished with each retelling until they bore no resemblance to whatever mundane event had inspired them. Come on, Tom, Emily said, trying to keep her voice light. You're not suggesting something paranormal is going on here. I'm not suggesting anything, Tom replied. I'm just saying that in my experience, when something doesn't make sense, it's usually because we don't have all the information. And sometimes we're never going to get that information, no matter how hard we look. The room fell silent. Outside, I could hear the storm intensifying, wind hammering against the station walls. It was going to be a long night. Sarah broke the silence. All right, here's what we're going to do. Miles, I want you to go through every piece of evidence we have. Photos, GPS data, that radio recording, everything. See if there's something we're missing. Emily, coordinate with the helicopter team for tomorrow's search. Weather permitting, we'll have eyes in the sky at first light. Tom, I need you to review Jared's route plan again. Maybe there's something in his intended path that explains where he might have gone. We dispersed to our assigned tasks. I set up in the small room we used for evidence analysis, spreading out printed photographs of the tent site across the desk. The radio sat in its evidence bag beside me, silent now since I'd turned it off. Just knowing what was on it made me uneasy. I started with the photographs of the tent interior. Everything Emily had said was true. It was too neat, too organized. The sleeping bag showed no signs of use. There were no wrinkles, no compression where a body had been lying. The stove was positioned exactly in the center of the tent, as if placed there for a photograph rather than actual use. Then I noticed something. On one of the photos showing the tent wall where the radio had been mounted, there was something written. It was small, easy to miss in the dim lighting and poor photo quality. I pulled up the image on my computer and enhanced it, increasing the brightness and contrast. It was a word written in what looked like marker on the tent fabric. Beacon. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I grabbed the radio from the evidence bag and examined it more carefully. What I'd initially taken for a standard SR-440 was actually a modified unit. Someone had opened it up and added components, soldered new circuits onto the main board. It was professional work, not some amateur hack job, but it definitely wasn't factory stock. I radioed Sarah. I think we need to bring in a communications specialist. This radio has been modified. I don't know what the modifications do, but they're way beyond my expertise. How soon can you get to Seattle? Sarah asked. In this storm? Not until tomorrow at the earliest. All right, first thing in the morning, I'll contact Dr. Morrison at UW. He consults for us sometimes on technical equipment. Maybe he can tell us what we're looking at. I spent another hour documenting the modifications, taking detailed photographs of the circuit board. The work was intricate, almost artistic in its precision. Whoever had done this knew exactly what they were doing. But why? What purpose did these modifications serve? Around midnight, I gave up and tried to get some sleep. The station had a few bunks for overnight stays, and I claimed one, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that voice. Wait, at 0500 hours, I gave up pretending and got up. The storm had passed during the night, and when I looked outside, the mountain was visible in the pre-dawn light, its peak glowing with alpenglow. It looked peaceful, serene, beautiful. You'd never know it was a place where people disappeared without explanation. The helicopter arrived at Ueros 6:30, a sleek Bell 407 operated by a private SARE contractor we used for difficult rescues. The pilot, whose name was Rick and who I'd worked with before, was all business. "Weather window's going to be narrow," he said, studying the meteorological data. "We've got maybe 3 hours before the next front moves in. After that, we're grounded until tomorrow." "Then let's not waste time," I said. Emily, Tom, and I loaded into the helicopter along with a paramedic named Claire, who I hadn't worked with before. Rick lifted off smoothly, and we rose above the trees, the station shrinking below us. The flight to Camp Muir took about 20 minutes, much faster than the 6-hour climb we'd done yesterday. Rick circled the area several times at different altitudes, giving us multiple perspectives. From the air, the mountain looked even more vast and unforgiving. "There's the tent," Emily said, pointing. The high-visibility flags we'd planted were easy to spot from above. Rick brought the helicopter lower, hovering about 50 feet above the site. That's when we saw him. About 200 yards from the tent, barely visible against the snow, was a figure. Human-shaped, lying motionless. Rick immediately adjusted our position, bringing the helicopter closer. "I've got a visual on what appears to be a body," Rick reported over the radio to base. "Positioning for extraction." The problem was there was nowhere to land. The terrain around Camp Muir was too steep and unstable. We'd have to go down on ropes. Tom and I geared up for rappelling while Rick held the helicopter in a hover. Claire stayed on board with the medical equipment, ready to assess the situation once we confirmed what we were looking at. I went down first, the rotor wash from the helicopter blasting me with wind and ice crystals. The descent took about 90 seconds, and then my feet touched snow. I unclipped from the rope and signaled Tom to follow. As I approached the figure, my heart was pounding. Please let him be alive, I thought. Please let this have a reasonable explanation. But as I got closer, I knew that wasn't going to happen. The figure was indeed Jared Holt. I could see his face, or what was left of it after exposure to the elements. He was lying on his back, arms at his sides, staring up at the sky with frozen eyes. He'd been dead for a while, probably since shortly after he'd set up that tent. Tom arrived beside me, breathing hard from the rapid descent. "Jesus," he muttered. I knelt down, checking for any vital signs even though I knew it was futile. Jared's skin was frozen solid, his clothes stiff with ice. There were no obvious injuries, no signs of trauma. He looked almost peaceful, like he'd simply laid down in the snow and decided to take a nap. "Claire, we're going to need a body bag," I radioed up to the helicopter. "Confirmed deceased, no obvious cause of death." The extraction took another 30 minutes. We secured Jared's body, hooked it to the helicopter's cargo line, and Rick lifted him up. Then Tom and I followed, climbing back up the rope into the aircraft. As we flew back to the station, I couldn't stop thinking about the timeline. If Jared had died shortly after setting up his tent, That meant someone else had been there later. Someone else had modified that radio, written that message on the tent wall, arranged everything just so. But who? And why? And most importantly, where were they now? The autopsy took 3 days. The county medical examiner was thorough, and I'll give him credit for that. He ran every test, checked every possible cause of death. When his report finally came back, it raised more questions than it answered. Cause of death: cardiac arrest, likely brought on by severe hypothermia. Time of death: approximately 36 to 48 hours before we found him, which matched my estimate. But here's what didn't make sense. Jared's core temperature, based on the freezing patterns in his tissues, suggested he'd been exposed to extreme cold for an extended period before death. Not the kind of cold you'd get from being outside in a storm wearing inadequate clothing. The kind of cold you'd get from being submerged in ice water or locked in a freezer. But there was no ice water near where we found him, and there certainly wasn't a freezer on the mountain. Dr. Morrison, the communications specialist from UW, arrived that same afternoon. He was younger than I expected, maybe 35, with the kind of intense focus that suggested he lived more in the world of circuits and signals than in the physical world. "Show me this radio," he said, barely bothering with pleasantries. I handed him the evidence bag. He examined it through the plastic for a moment, then carefully removed it and began studying the modifications with a jeweler's loupe. "Fascinating," he murmured. "Whoever did this really knew what they were doing. See these components here? That's a custom-built signal processor. And this module, I think it's a recorder, but not like anything I've seen in consumer electronics. Can you tell what it's for?" I asked. He was silent for several minutes, tracing circuits with his finger. "Based on the design, I'd say this unit was modified to do 2 things. First, to receive and record signals on frequencies well outside the normal range for a mountaineering radio. Second, to replay those signals on a loop exactly as you found it." "What kind of frequencies are we talking about?" "Very low frequency, VLF, the kind used by the military for submarine communication, or by certain natural phenomena." "Natural phenomena?" Dr. Morrison looked up from the radio. "Earth's magnetic field generates all sorts of electromagnetic radiation. Most of it's just noise, but there are patterns in that noise. Whistlers, chorus, hiss. It's called natural radio, and it sounds weird. Alien almost. Some people think those signals are trying to communicate something." I felt that chill again. "Are you saying Jared modified his radio to listen to electromagnetic noise from the Earth?" "I'm saying someone did. Whether it was Jared or someone else, I can't tell you. But this kind of modification doesn't happen by accident. It requires knowledge, planning, specific components. This was intentional." Sarah had been listening to the conversation. "Doctor, is it possible that these modifications could have somehow contributed to his death?" "You mean like radiation exposure?" He shook his head. "No, these frequencies are non-ionizing. They can't harm human tissue, but..." He hesitated. "But what?" I pressed. "There are documented cases of people experiencing psychological effects from exposure to certain electromagnetic fields. Disorientation, paranoia, auditory hallucinations. If Jared was listening to VLF signals for extended periods, especially at high altitude where oxygen levels affect brain function, it's possible it could have influenced his behavior. That gave me something to work with, at least. A rational explanation, or the beginning of one. Jared had modified his radio, possibly become obsessed with these natural radio signals, and in his altered mental state, he'd done something that led to his death. It didn't explain everything, but it was better than nothing. Over the next few days, we've pieced together what we could of Jared's final hours. His last confirmed position was Pebble Creek at 8:47 hours. Based on the timeline and his rate of travel, he would have reached the Camp Muir area sometime in the early afternoon. He'd set up his tent, arranged his gear, and then something had happened. The working theory was that he'd gone out to explore, maybe to find a good position for his modified radio to pick up those VLF signals he was apparently interested in. He'd gotten disoriented in the deteriorating weather, suffered severe hypothermia, and died. Later, someone else had found his camp, discovered the radio, and for reasons unknown, had set it to play that looped message. But I didn't believe it. Not entirely. There were too many inconsistencies, too many details that didn't quite line up. For one thing, we never found any evidence of this mysterious other person. No footprints around the tent, though the storm could have covered those. No sign that anyone else had been in the area. For another, that word written on the tent wall, beacon. If Jared had written it himself, why? And if someone else had written it, what did it mean? I kept coming back to that radio message. Wait. Such a simple word, but loaded with implications. Wait for what? Wait for who? And why broadcast it on a loop? 2 weeks after we found Jared's body, I made a decision that probably wasn't my smartest move. I requested permission to return to Camp Muir, alone, to do a more thorough investigation of the area. Sarah was reluctant. Miles, the case is closed. Medical examiner ruled it accidental death due to hypothermia. There's nothing more to investigate. There's the matter of who modified the radio and set up that message, I countered. That's evidence tampering at minimum, possibly obstruction of justice. We can't just ignore it. Sarah studied me for a long moment. This isn't about evidence tampering. You think there's something else going on up there, don't you? I asked. Come on, Sarah. You read the reports. You saw the photos. Does any of this make sense to you? She sighed. No, but that doesn't mean there's some grand mystery to solve. Sometimes things don't make sense because we don't have all the information. And sometimes we're never going to have all the information. Tom said almost the exact same thing. Tom's usually right. She paused. All right, you can go, but you take a radio, you check in every 2 hours, and at the first sign of bad weather, you get yourself down off that mountain. Clear? Clear. I set out the next morning in perfect conditions. Clear sky, minimal wind, temperatures just below freezing. The kind of day that makes you understand why people love climbing. The mountain was beautiful, almost serene. I made good time, reaching Camp Muir by early afternoon. Jared's tent was still there. We hadn't removed it yet, partly because it was evidence, partly because the logistics of getting it down were complicated. The high-visibility flags snapped in the breeze. I spent an hour photographing everything again, looking for details I might have missed the first time. Then I began expanding my search radius, moving in careful circles around the campsite. About 40 yards east of the tent, I found something. Scratched into the rock, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, were coordinates. GPS coordinates, to be precise. I pulled out my unit and punched them in. The coordinates pointed to a location about 3 miles further up the mountain, well off any established trail. In an area we hadn't searched because it would have been suicidally dangerous to try to reach in the conditions we'd had during the initial rescue operation. I radioed Sarah. I found something. GPS coordinates carved into rock near the tent. Permission to investigate. There was a long pause. How far? 3 miles. Northeast. It's off trail. Conditions? Perfect right now. I've got at least 4 hours of daylight left. Another pause. I could imagine Sarah weighing the risks, the potential rewards, the liability if something went wrong. Finally, go. But Miles, if you're not back at Camp Muir with regular radio contact, I'm sending a team after you. and I'll make sure everyone knows you're paying for the helicopter fuel. Deal. The terrain between Camp Muir and those coordinates was some of the most technically challenging I'd encountered. I had to navigate across a glacier field, watching constantly for crevasses, then scramble up a steep rock face. My hands were raw by the time I reached the top, despite my gloves. But when I got there, I understood why Jared had come here. The coordinates led to a small plateau, maybe 20 yards across, surrounded by rock walls on 3 sides. The 4th side opened onto a view of the valley below that was breathtaking. But more importantly, the rock walls created a kind of natural amphitheater, and when I stood in the center of the plateau and activated my own radio, I immediately heard what Jared must have heard. Static, but not random static. There was a pattern to it, a rhythm, almost like a voice. Not speaking words, not exactly, but modulating in a way that suggested intelligence or at least purpose. I recorded 30 seconds of it, then turned off my radio. My hands were shaking, and not from the cold. That sound had been unsettling on a primal level, triggering something deep in my hindbrain that said, "This isn't right. This doesn't belong here." I looked around the plateau more carefully. There, scratched into the rock, more words. The signal calls. The mountain answers. Do not follow. My heart was pounding now. What had Jared discovered up here? What had he been trying to understand? I spent another hour exploring the plateau, documenting everything. I found more scratched messages, increasingly frantic. It's not natural. Something is listening. The cold comes from below. That last one made me stop. The cold comes from below. Not from above, not from the weather. From below. I remembered the medical examiner's report. The kind of cold that had killed Jared wasn't atmospheric. It was something else, something more intense and focused, like he'd been exposed directly to some source of extreme cold. I walked to the edge of the plateau and looked down. There was nothing obviously unusual about the rock formation, but when I knelt and placed my hand on the stone, I felt it. A subtle vibration, barely perceptible, like the mountain was humming at a frequency just below the threshold of hearing. And it was cold, not surface cold from ice and snow. Deep cold, radiating up from somewhere inside the mountain. I pulled my hand back and stood up quickly. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave, to get off this plateau and get down the mountain as fast as possible. Instead, I activated my radio again. This time, I let it run, listening to that strange modulated static. And as I listened, I started to hear patterns. Not words, not exactly, but something that wanted to be words. Something that was trying to communicate through the static, using frequencies and rhythms that human language wasn't designed to interpret. Then I heard it, clear as a bell, cutting through the static. Wait. The same word from Jared's looped message. The same tone, the same inflection. But this wasn't a recording. This was live, happening right now. And then, underneath it, fainter. Do not come closer. I turned off the radio and stepped back from the edge of the plateau. My breathing was rapid, my heart racing. This wasn't hypothermia causing hallucinations. This was real. Whatever Jared had found up here, it was real. I need to get down, I thought. I need to document this, report it, get experts up here to study it properly. This is beyond my expertise, beyond anything. That's when I felt it. That same deep cold I'd felt in the rock, but now surrounding me, pressing in from all sides. The temperature plummeted, and I could see my breath fogging in front of me, far more than it should have been. I ran. Not proud of it, but I ran. Scrambled back across that plateau, down the rock face, probably way too fast to be safe, across the glacier field. I didn't stop until I reached Camp Muir, and even then, I kept moving, not pausing to rest until I was 1,000 feet lower. When I finally stopped, gasping for air, I looked back up at the mountain. For just a moment, I could have sworn I saw something. A figure, standing on that distant plateau, watching me. But when I blinked, it was gone. I radioed Sarah. Coming down, I found what I needed to find. Copy that. What did you find? I thought about how to answer that. How do you explain that the mountain itself might be alive, might be conscious in some way we don't understand? How do you explain that Jared hadn't died from hypothermia caused by weather, but from something else, something that lives in the deep places of the earth and reaches up through the rock? I'll explain when I get back, I said finally. The descent took 3 hours. Sarah was waiting at the station along with Tom and Emily. They could tell from my face that something had happened. You look like you've seen a ghost, Tom said. Maybe I have, I replied, or maybe something worse. I told them everything. The coordinates, the plateau, the messages scratched into rock, the sound I'd heard on the radio. That voice saying, "Wait," and "Do not come closer." The unnatural cold that had surrounded me. They listened without interrupting. When I finished, Tom was the first to speak. "I believe you," he said simply. "And I think we need to mark that area as permanently off limits. No one should go up there." Sarah nodded slowly. "I'll file a report recommending that section be designated as a hazard zone. We can cite unstable terrain, crevasse danger, whatever sounds reasonable. But Miles, you understand we can't put the real reason in an official document." "I know." "What do you think it is?" Emily asked quietly. "The thing you heard, the cold, all of it?" I'd been thinking about that during the entire descent. I don't know. Maybe some kind of geological phenomenon we don't understand. Maybe something about the way electromagnetic radiation interacts with the mountain structure. Or maybe what? Sarah prompted. Maybe the old stories are right. Maybe there are places in this world where the boundaries are thin, where something else can reach through. The indigenous people who lived here before us, they had legends about the mountain being alive, being aware. We dismissed those stories as primitive superstition. But what if they weren't wrong? What if they just didn't have the scientific vocabulary to describe what they were experiencing? Tom nodded slowly. "My grandfather was Yakima. He used to tell stories about the mountain, about how you had to respect it. Never take more than you needed. Never go to certain places. I always thought those were just cautionary tales to keep kids from wandering off. Now, I'm not so sure." We talked for another hour, but we all knew we'd reached the limit of what we could understand or explain. Some mysteries don't have answers, at least not answers we're capable of comprehending. Jared's case was officially closed as accidental death. The modified radio was cataloged as evidence and stored in a secure facility. Dr. Morrison wrote a technical report on the modifications, which was filed away and forgotten by everyone except me. The plateau where I'd found those messages was marked on internal maps as hazardous terrain, and we've successfully kept people away from it ever since. But I think about it sometimes, usually late at night when I'm alone in the station, and the mountain is a dark presence outside the windows. I think about Jared and what drove him to seek out those signals. I think about that voice saying, "Wait," and I wonder, wait for what? Wait for us to understand? Wait for the right time to reveal itself? Or just wait, because whatever's up there operates on a timescale we can't comprehend, and our entire human history is just a brief moment to it. 3 months after Jared's death, I was doing a routine patrol when my radio crackled unexpectedly. There was a burst of static, and then, very faintly, I heard it again. Wait. I turned off the radio and didn't turn it back on for the rest of that patrol. Some messages, I've decided, aren't meant to be answered. The mountain keeps its secrets. It always has, and it always will. And maybe that's for the best. Because some things, once you understand them, you can't ununderstand. Some knowledge changes you in ways you can't predict or control. I'm still a ranger. I still patrol these trails, still rescue lost hikers, still do all the things I did before. But I'm more careful now about where I go. There are places on this mountain I won't visit anymore. Places where the rock hums with that subsonic frequency and the air feels wrong in ways I can't articulate. Tom retired last year. On his last day, he pulled me aside and said something I'll never forget. The mountain lets us live here. Never forget that. We're guests, and we can be asked to leave at any time. He was right. We build our trails and our shelters. We mark routes and install safety equipment. And we tell ourselves we've tamed this place. But we haven't. We've just been tolerated, allowed to exist on the mountain's sufferance. And every now and then it reminds us of that fact in ways we can't ignore. I never found out who carved those coordinates into the rock near Jared's tent. Maybe he did it himself, before whatever happened to him happened. Maybe someone else left them there as a warning. Or maybe they were always there, waiting for someone to find them. I don't go to that plateau anymore. The memory of that cold, that voice, is enough. Sometimes at night, I dream about it. I'm standing on that plateau again, and I can hear the signal clearly now. Not modulated static, but actual words in a language I somehow understand. And it's saying things about the nature of the mountain, about what lives in the deep places beneath the rock, about the true age of this place and what came before humans ever walked here. Then I wake up and I tell myself it was just a dream, just my brain trying to make sense of something it encountered that it wasn't equipped to process. But I'm not sure I believe that. I think maybe part of me is still up there, still listening to that signal, still trying to understand. The mountain is still there. It'll be there long after I'm gone, long after everyone reading this is gone. And whatever secret it keeps, whatever consciousness or force or phenomenon exists in those high, cold places, it'll keep existing, waiting, watching. Patient in a way only something ancient and inhuman can be patient. If you ever go hiking on Mount Rainier, stick to the marked trails. Don't go looking for plateaus that aren't on the maps. Don't modify your radio to pick up frequencies it wasn't designed for. And if you hear a voice in the static telling you to wait, don't try to answer it. Some invitations aren't meant to be accepted. I still work here. I still love this place, despite everything. Or maybe because of everything. Because knowing there's something larger than ourselves, something we can't control or fully understand, that's both terrifying and strangely comforting. It reminds us that the universe is bigger and stranger than our daily lives would suggest. Just last week, a hiker came into the station with a story. He'd been near Camp Muir and heard something unusual on his radio. A voice, he said, speaking a single word over and over. When I asked what the word was, he looked uncomfortable. "It's going to sound crazy," he said. "Try me," I replied. It was saying wait, just that one word, wait, over and over. I told him it was probably interference from another hiker's radio, a common occurrence in the mountains. He seemed satisfied with that explanation and went on his way. I didn't tell him the truth. What would be the point? He'd go back to his normal life and the mountain would still be here. still transmitting its messages to whoever has the equipment and the curiosity to listen. As for me, I'm done listening. I've heard enough. Whatever the mountain has to say, it can say it to someone else. I'm just going to do my job, patrol my trails, and try to keep people safe. That's all I can do. That's all any of us can do. The mountain will wait. It's good at waiting. It's had millions of years to practice. And someday, maybe, someone will finally understand what it's trying to say. I hope I'm not around when that happens. I hope no one is, because I have a feeling that once we truly comprehend what's up there, once we break through to real communication with whatever exists in those high, cold places, everything will change. And I'm not sure we're ready for that change. I'm not sure we ever will be. The mountain waits. The signal continues. And somewhere, in a frequency just beyond normal hearing, a voice keeps repeating the same message it's been repeating for who knows how long. There's something about being alone in a fire lookout tower at night that changes you. Not all at once, but gradually, shift by shift, until you start to understand that the person you were before doesn't quite fit anymore. The silence gets into your bones. The darkness becomes something you can feel pressing against the windows. And the isolation, that constant awareness that you're miles from another human being, starts to feel less like loneliness and more like a warning. My name is Leah Carter, and I've been a ranger at Mount Rainier for 7 years. For the last 3 of those years, I've worked the night watch at Cascade Lookout, a fire observation tower perched at 6,800 feet on the eastern flank of the mountain. It's not a popular assignment. Most rangers do everything they can to avoid it. The hours are brutal, the conditions are harsh, and the tower itself is old, creaky, and uncomfortable. But I volunteered for it, asked for it specifically. Cole Jennings, our station supervisor, thought I was crazy. "You know what happened to Marcus, right?" he'd said when I first requested the transfer. I did know. Everyone knew. Marcus Reed had been the night watch ranger before me. One shift, about 4 years ago, he'd simply stopped responding to radio checks. When they sent someone up to investigate the next morning, they found the tower empty. His gear still there, coffee still warm in his mug. Marcus himself was found 3 days later, 12 miles from the tower, wandering along a Forest Service road with no memory of how he'd gotten there. He couldn't explain what had happened, couldn't even remember leaving the tower. He just kept saying the same thing. I had to follow the light. Marcus never came back to work. Last I heard, he was living with his sister in Oregon, still trying to piece together those missing days. The official report called it a mental health episode, possibly triggered by the isolation and stress of the night watch. They recommended additional psychological screening for anyone assigned to solo overnight positions. I passed the screening. I always do. So why did I want this job? That's what Cole asked me. And I gave him the answer I knew he wanted to hear. I liked the quiet. The solitude gave me time to think. I was good at staying alert during long shifts. All of that was true. But it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that I needed to understand what had happened to Marcus. Because 3 years before Marcus disappeared, another ranger had vanished from the same tower under similar circumstances. And 2 years before that, another one. The pattern went back almost 15 years, though nobody wanted to talk about it. Each incident was written off individually, explained away with reasonable-sounding causes. But when you looked at them together, when you saw the pattern, it became clear that something was happening at Cascade Lookout. Something that had nothing to do with isolation or mental health. My first few months on night watch were uneventful. Quiet, mostly. I'd arrive at the tower around 2200 hours, just as the day shift ranger was packing up. We'd do a brief handoff, discuss any incidents or concerns, and then I'd be alone. The tower itself is a simple structure. 3 levels connected by a narrow metal staircase. The bottom level is storage and equipment. The middle level has a small sleeping area and basic amenities. The top level is the observation deck, a room with windows on all sides and all the monitoring equipment, radios, weather instruments, and fire detection gear. The routine was straightforward. Conduct visual sweeps of the surrounding area every 30 minutes, monitor weather conditions, respond to any radio traffic, and log everything in the daily record. Between sweeps, I'd read, write, sometimes just sit and watch the darkness. It sounds boring, and in many ways it was, but there was also something meditative about it, something that made the hours pass in a strange, fluid way. The first unusual thing happened about 6 weeks into my assignment. It was early November, and we'd had heavy rain for 3 days straight. The storm had finally cleared around sunset, leaving everything drenched and covered in a thick fog that reduced visibility to maybe 20 yards. I was doing my midnight sweep when I saw it, a light moving through the fog at the base of the tower. At first, I thought it was just a reflection, maybe my own flashlight bouncing off the moisture in the air. But when I turned off my light, the other light was still there, moving slowly from right to left about 50 yards out. It was steady, not flickering like a fire, and it seemed to be at ground level, moving through the trees. I grabbed the radio. "Base, this is Cascade Lookout. I've got a visual on an unidentified light source approximately 50 yards southwest of the tower. Could be a lost hiker, requesting guidance." Static. That wasn't unusual. Radio communication could be spotty at night, especially with weather interference. I tried again. Same result. The emergency channel was clear, which meant the equipment was working. The regular channel just wasn't getting through. I watched the light for another 10 minutes. It moved in a consistent direction, never speeding up or slowing down, never wavering. Then it stopped, just stopped dead, and for a moment I thought maybe it had been extinguished. But no, it was still there, stationary now, pointing directly at the tower. That's when I felt it, that prickling sensation at the back of your neck, the one that says you're being watched. It's an ancient instinct, hardwired into us from when we were prey animals. And standing there in that glass-walled room, backlit by my equipment, I suddenly felt very exposed. I turned off all the lights in the observation deck. The change was immediate and disorienting. Without the interior lights, the windows became mirrors, reflecting my own face back at me from every angle. I stood very still, waiting for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. When they did, I could see the light outside more clearly. It was definitely stationary now, definitely pointed at the tower, and it was brighter than I'd initially thought, almost like a searchlight, though the beam didn't spread the way a searchlight beam would. Then it went out, just like that, instant darkness. I waited, counting seconds in my head. At 30 seconds, I turned my flashlight back on and swept it across the area where the light had been. Nothing. Just fog and trees. At 60 seconds, I turned the tower lights back on and resumed my normal routine, logging the incident in the daily record with as much detail as I could remember. The radio crackled to life about 10 minutes later. "Cascade Lookout, this is Base. We had some interference on the line. Everything okay up there?" "All clear," I said. "Had a possible sighting earlier, unidentified light in the fog. Lasted about 15 minutes, then disappeared. No other activity." "Copy that. Probably just a hiker's headlamp. There was a group scheduled to camp at Sunrise Ridge tonight. They might have gotten disoriented in the fog." "Possible," I said, though I didn't believe it. Sunrise Ridge was 4 miles from the tower, and the light I'd seen was much closer. But I didn't argue. What was I going to say? That I had a bad feeling about it. The rest of that shift passed without incident, and I didn't see the light again. When Cole arrived at 0600 to relieve me, I mentioned it in the handoff, keeping my description factual and brief. He made a note but didn't seem particularly concerned. Hikers with lights in the fog. It happened, nothing to worry about. But I did worry. I worried because of what happened next. 2 nights later, same conditions. Heavy fog, low visibility, and right on schedule, at almost exactly midnight, I saw the light again. Same location, same steady movement, same behavior. It traveled from right to left for about 10 minutes, then stopped and pointed at the tower. I kept the interior lights on this time, wanting to see if it would react differently. It didn't. After about 15 minutes, it went out. This time, I didn't report it immediately. Instead, I went down to the middle level and pulled out the historical logs, the handwritten records that went back decades. I started reading through the entries from previous night watch rangers, looking for any mention of unusual lights. It took me 2 hours, but I found them. Over the past 15 years, there were 17 separate reports of unexplained lights in the fog near the tower. Different rangers, different years, but always the same description. Steady light, moving through the trees, then stopping to point at the tower before disappearing. What made my skin crawl was what I found in the margins of some of those entries. Small notes, written in different handwriting, clearly added later. Next to several of the light sightings were dates, and when I cross-referenced those dates with the personnel records, I realized they corresponded to the nights when rangers had disappeared from the tower. Marcus Reed's last shift, the ranger before him, the one before that. Each disappearance had been preceded by a report of lights in the fog. I sat there in the dim glow of my flashlight, reading those old entries over and over, trying to find some alternative explanation. Maybe it was just coincidence. Maybe I was seeing patterns where none existed. But the more I read, the more convinced I became that something was happening here, something that followed a clear pattern. The lights appeared during heavy fog. They were seen multiple times over several nights. And then, usually on the 3rd or 4th sighting, something happened to the ranger on duty. I was on my 2nd sighting. That gave me maybe 2 more nights to figure out what was going on, or to get the hell out of the tower and never come back. The smart thing would have been to report everything I'd found, to show Cole the logs and the pattern, and demand a full investigation. But I knew how that conversation would go. I'd be the ranger who couldn't handle the isolation, who'd worked herself up over some old stories and a few reports of lights that probably had perfectly ordinary explanations. They'd pull me off the night watch, possibly out of the park entirely, and the next ranger they assigned would walk into the same situation with no warning. No, if I was going to do this, I had to do it right. I had to gather evidence, document everything, and most importantly, I had to understand what the lights actually were. Natural phenomenon? Equipment malfunction? Or something else? Something I didn't want to think about but couldn't completely dismiss. The next night, I came prepared. I brought my personal camera with a telephoto lens, extra batteries, and a backup radio. I also brought something I'd borrowed from the ranger station without exactly asking permission, a thermal imaging scope, the kind we used for wildlife monitoring. If there was something out there in the fog, the thermal scope would see it regardless of visibility. The shift started normally. I did my standard setup, checked all the equipment, logged my arrival. The weather forecast called for more fog, and sure enough, by 2300 hours the tower was socked in completely, visibility down to almost nothing. I settled in to wait. If the pattern held, the light would appear around midnight. At 2355 hours I saw it, right on schedule, right in the same location. This time I was ready. I grabbed the camera and started shooting, bracketing exposures to make sure I'd capture something useful despite the difficult conditions. Then I picked up the thermal scope and trained it on the light source. What I saw through that scope made absolutely no sense. The light was there, clearly visible in the regular spectrum. But in thermal? Nothing. No heat signature at all. It was the same temperature as the surrounding air, which was impossible. Any light source generates heat. Even an LED, even bioluminescence produces some thermal signature. This didn't. I lowered the scope and looked with my naked eyes again. The light was still there, moving steadily. I raised the scope. Nothing. I did this 3 more times, each time getting the same impossible result. The light existed. I could see it clearly. I was photographing it. But thermally, it wasn't there. That's when I heard the sound. A soft scraping, like metal on metal, coming from below. From the staircase. I froze, every muscle tensing. The tower was supposed to be empty except for me. The door at the bottom was locked, and I had the only key. But someone, or something, was on the stairs. The scraping came again, closer now. Footsteps on metal treads, slow and deliberate, climbing toward the observation deck. I grabbed my flashlight and the radio, backing away from the stairwell entrance. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is a restricted area. Identify yourself." No response. Just those steady, climbing footsteps. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause. Like whoever was climbing was dragging something behind them, or having difficulty with the stairs. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to use the radio to call for help, but I couldn't make myself move. I was rooted to the spot, flashlight held out in front of me like a weapon, watching the top of that stairwell, waiting to see what would emerge. The footsteps stopped. I counted to 10, then 20. Nothing. Complete silence. I forced myself to move, creeping toward the stairwell entrance, shining my flashlight down into the darkness. The stairs were empty. I could see all the way down to the middle level, and there was nothing there. No person, no animal, nothing that could have made those sounds. That's when I noticed the water. There, on the metal treads, were footprints. Wet footprints, tracking up from the middle level, stopping right at the top of the stairs. I looked down at my own feet. My boots were dry. I hadn't been outside since arriving at the tower 6 hours ago. The last rain had been 2 days ago. Everything should be dry. I knelt down and touched one of the wet prints. It was cold, ice cold, but definitely water, and it was fresh. I could see it still dripping down from one tread to the next. The prints were shaped like boots, human boots, roughly my size, but they weren't my prints. They couldn't be. I stood up slowly, my mind racing through possibilities. Condensation from temperature differential. But the tower was heated, and the stairs were inside, protected from the elements. A leak in the roof. I looked up. The ceiling was dry, no signs of water damage. Someone else in the tower? I did a quick sweep of all 3 levels, checking every corner, every possible hiding place. I was alone. By the time I finished the sweep, the footprints had started to evaporate, the water absorbed into the metal or simply vanishing into the dry air. Within 20 minutes, they were completely gone, leaving no evidence they'd ever existed. I checked the external light. It was gone too, vanished while I'd been distracted by the footprints. I looked at my watch. 00:45 hours. The whole incident, from first seeing the light to finding the footprints to now, had taken less than an hour. But it felt like much longer, like I'd somehow slipped out of normal time. I spent the rest of that shift hyper-alert, jumping at every sound, constantly checking the stairs for new prints. None appeared. The radio stayed clear, no anomalies. Weather conditions remained stable. By the time Cole arrived at Aero 600, I was exhausted, running on adrenaline and coffee. "Rough night?" he asked, taking in my appearance. I must have looked as wrecked as I felt. I thought about telling him everything, showing him the photos, describing the footprints. But what would I say? That I'd seen a light with no thermal signature and wet footprints that appeared out of nowhere. He'd think I was losing it, just like Marcus. "Just tired," I said instead. "Didn't sleep well before the shift." He accepted that, and I headed down the mountain with my camera and my questions, no closer to understanding what was happening, but absolutely certain of one thing. I was going back. Because if the pattern held, I had one more night, maybe two, before whatever happened to Marcus happened to me. And I needed to be ready. I didn't go home after that shift. Instead, I drove straight to the ranger station and let myself into the records room. It was early, not even 0700 yet, and the building was mostly empty except for the early shift personnel. Nobody questioned my presence. Rangers accessing old records wasn't unusual, and I had clearance. I pulled every file I could find related to Cascade Lookout. Incident reports, maintenance logs, personnel records, even historical documents from when the tower was first built in 1952. I spread everything across a table in the back corner and started reading, looking for connections, for explanations, for anything that might help me understand what I was dealing with. The tower's history was unremarkable for its first 30 years. Standard firewatch operations, routine maintenance, nothing unusual. Then, in 1983, I found the first incident report that matched what I'd experienced. A ranger named Thomas Whitmore reported seeing unexplained lights moving through fog near the tower on multiple occasions. His reports were detailed and consistent with what I'd witnessed. Then, 3 weeks after his first report, Whitmore was found unconscious on the access road, 2 miles from the tower. He claimed to have no memory of leaving. Medical evaluation showed no injuries, no drugs or alcohol, nothing that explained his condition. He was reassigned to a different position and retired 2 years later. After Whitmore, the pattern repeated roughly every 2 to 3 years. A ranger would report unusual lights, usually during fog. The sightings would occur multiple times over a short period. Then, the ranger would either disappear temporarily, like Marcus, or request immediate transfer off the night watch, citing personal reasons. I counted 11 cases over 42 years. 11 rangers, all affected by something at that tower. I was looking for common factors when Cole found me. "Leah, what are you doing here? You should be home sleeping." I looked up from the pile of documents. Cole was standing in the doorway, coffee in hand, looking concerned. I made a decision then. I couldn't do this alone anymore. "Cole, sit down. I need to show you something." Over the next hour, I walked him through everything I'd found, the pattern of disappearances, the consistent reports of lights, the timeline showing it happened every few years. I showed him my photos from the previous night, explained about the thermal scope readings, described the wet footprints. To his credit, he didn't interrupt, didn't dismiss me. He just listened, his expression growing more troubled with each piece of evidence I presented. When I finished, he sat back and rubbed his face. "Jesus, Leah, why didn't you come to me sooner?" "Because I needed to be sure. I needed evidence, not just hunches and old stories. And I needed to know I wasn't imagining things." "The footprints," he said. "You're certain they were wet, not just condensation or a shadow?" I touched them. They were water, cold water, fresh enough that I could see it dripping, and they disappeared within 20 minutes. Cole stood and walked to the window, looking out at the mountain. "I've been supervisor here for 8 years. In that time, we've had 2 rangers request transfers off the night watch at Cascade. Both cited the isolation, said it was affecting their mental health. I never pushed for details. People have their limits, and if someone says they need off, I trust their judgment. He turned back to me. I should have looked deeper, should have seen the pattern. It's not your fault. The reports are spread across decades, filed under different categories. You'd have to be specifically looking for it to see the connection. What do you want to do? He asked. That was the question I'd been asking myself all morning. I want to go back tonight, with proper equipment, backup, and documentation. If this is happening, if there's really something at that tower, we need to understand it. For Marcus, for all the others, and for whoever comes after me. Cole was quiet for a long moment. And if it's dangerous, if whatever is happening there is causing genuine harm, then we need to know that too. We can't just keep sending rangers up there blind. He nodded slowly. All right, but not alone. I'm coming with you, and we're bringing David Marsh from SAR. He's got experience with overnight operations, and he's solid in a crisis. We'll also inform search and rescue of our location and set up regular radio checks every 30 minutes. If we miss even one check, they come up the mountain. Agreed? Agreed. We spent the rest of the day preparing. David Marsh was brought into the situation and shown the evidence. Like Cole, he didn't dismiss it, though I could see the skepticism in his eyes. That was fine. Skepticism was healthy. What mattered was that he was willing to come and help document whatever we found. We assembled our equipment, multiple cameras with various lenses and light settings, thermal imaging gear, audio recorders, extra radios with backup batteries, emergency beacons, and even some basic environmental sensors that could detect temperature changes, electromagnetic fluctuations, and barometric pressure variations. If something was happening at that tower, we were going to capture it from every possible angle. At 2100 hours, the 3 of us drove up to Cascade Lookout. The weather forecast was perfect for our purposes. Heavy fog expected after midnight, low visibility, calm winds. Exactly the conditions when the lights typically appeared. David whistled when he saw the tower. Cozy, and by cozy, I mean I can see why people lose their minds up here. Wait until you see it in the fog, I said. We hauled our equipment up to the observation deck and began setting up. Cole established the radio protocol with the base station, confirming our check-in schedule. David positioned the cameras at different windows, each one trained on the area where I'd seen the lights. I set up the thermal scope and the environmental sensors, creating a baseline reading of normal conditions. By 2300 hours, we were ready. And right on schedule, the fog rolled in, thick and smothering, reducing the world outside our windows to a gray void. Inside the observation deck, lit by our equipment and the soft glow of instrument panels, it felt like we were suspended in nothing, a small bubble of light floating in an infinite emptiness. How long do we wait? David asked, checking his camera settings for the 3rd time. Based on previous sightings, the light usually appears around midnight plus or minus 30 minutes, I said. We should start seeing it within the next hour. Cole was at the west window, scanning the fog with binoculars. Visibility is about 15 feet. If this light appears, we should have plenty of time to document it. We waited. Midnight came and went. 0:30, 0:45, nothing. I started to worry that our presence, 3 people instead of 1, had somehow changed the conditions. Maybe whatever caused the phenomenon required the ranger to be alone. Then, at 0:52, David said quietly, "I've got something. Southwest quadrant, low elevation." I moved to his position. There it was, exactly as I'd seen it before. A steady light, moving slowly through the fog about 50 yards from the tower. Cole immediately started photographing. David adjusted his camera to follow its movement. I grabbed the thermal scope. "Thermal's cold," I reported. "No heat signature at all." "That's impossible," David said, not taking his eye from his camera. "That's what I said, but look for yourself." He took the scope, looked through it, then lowered it and stared at me. "There's nothing there. In thermal, there's nothing there." "But you can see it with your naked eye?" "Clear as day. This is—" He trailed off, lost for words. The light continued its steady progression, moving from right to left just as it had in my previous sightings. We documented everything: timestamps, position changes, the complete absence of thermal signature. Cole tried different camera settings, different exposures, different filters. In every case, the light appeared clearly in the optical spectrum but registered no heat. "It's stopping," Cole said. He was right. The light had halted its movement and was now stationary, pointed directly at the tower. We all felt it then, that same sensation of being watched. David shifted uncomfortably. "This is where it usually goes out," I said. "In about—" The light vanished. One moment there, the next gone, as if someone had flipped a switch. "Did anyone hear anything?" Cole asked. "Any sound when it disappeared?" We all shook our heads. The fog outside was completely silent. No wind, no rustling branches, nothing. Just that oppressive, muffling quiet that only heavy fog can create. "Environmental sensors?" Cole prompted. I checked the displays. Temperature stable. Barometric pressure normal. No electromagnetic anomalies. Whatever that was, it's not registering on any of our equipment except optically. David was reviewing his camera footage. "I got it. Clear images from start to finish. But Leah, you said you usually hear something after the light disappears. Footsteps on the stairs? Not every time, but yes, that's happened." We waited, listening. 5 minutes passed. 10. Nothing. I was beginning to think the presence of 3 people really had changed the dynamic when I heard it. That same metallic scraping, distant but definitely coming from below. Cole and David heard it too. Cole moved toward the stairwell entrance, flashlight ready. "Stay back," he said. "Let me look first." He shined his light down the stairs. "I don't see anything. David, can you come down with me? Leah, stay here and maintain visual on the exterior. If you see anything else, radio immediately." They descended carefully, and I was left alone in the observation deck. I tried to focus on watching the fog, scanning for more lights, but my attention kept drifting back to the stairwell. I could hear Cole and David moving around below, their voices muffled but audible. Then Cole's voice came over the radio, tense. "Leah, you need to see this." I hurried down to the middle level. Cole and David were standing near the stairs leading to the bottom level, both shining their flashlights at the treads. There, exactly as I'd seen before, were wet footprints. Fresh water dripping down from one step to the next. "These weren't here when we arrived," David said. "I would have noticed, and it's been hours since any of us went down to that level." Cole knelt and touched one of the prints. "It's cold, really cold, almost freezing." He looked at the environmental sensors I'd brought down. "Are these monitoring down here?" I checked the remote display. "Yes, temperature on this level is 58 degrees, same as when we arrived. No changes recorded." "But this water is near freezing," Cole said. "That doesn't make sense." David was examining the footprints more closely, taking photographs. "The tread pattern is consistent. Same boot, same person, walking up the stairs. But look here." He pointed to one particular print. "This one's different. See how the impression is deeper on the outside edge. That suggests the person was favoring their right side, maybe injured or carrying something heavy." "Can you tell the size?" I asked. "Standard women's size 8, maybe 9. Same as yours, Leah." A chill ran down my spine. My boots are dry, I haven't been outside. Cole stood up. I want to document everything about these prints before they disappear. David, full photographic series from multiple angles. Leah, can we get samples of the water? I ran back up to the observation deck and grabbed some of the sample collection equipment we'd brought. By the time I returned, maybe 3 minutes later, the footprints were already starting to fade. I managed to collect 2 small samples before they evaporated completely, capturing the water in sealed, sterile containers. We watched the last traces disappear, leaving the stairs completely dry again. The whole process took about 15 minutes, same as before. Well, David said, I'm officially creeped out. What the hell did we just witness? I don't know, Cole admitted. But we've got it documented. Photos, video, water samples, timestamps, everything. Whatever this is, it's real, and it's consistent. We returned to the observation deck and reviewed our findings. 2 distinct phenomena. The light with no thermal signature, and the wet footprints that appeared and disappeared. Both occurred during heavy fog. Both happened on a predictable schedule, but we still had no explanation for what was causing them or what they meant. At 0200, during a routine radio check with base, I noticed something odd. The regular check-in channel was working fine, but when I switched to scan mode, letting the radio search for other active frequencies, I picked up something. It was faint, barely audible, but it was there, a signal on a frequency that shouldn't have any traffic. Cole, listen to this. I turned up the volume. Through the static came a sound, rhythmic and regular, like breathing, but distorted, almost mechanical. And underneath it, barely perceptible, something that might have been words. David pulled out a portable spectrum analyzer. That frequency, it's not one we use. It's not commercial, either. This is... I don't know what this is. We listened for several minutes, trying to make sense of the sound. Then, cutting through the static, clear and unmistakable, came a voice. My voice. Help me. I went cold. The voice from the radio was mine, my exact tone and inflection, but I hadn't said anything. I looked at Cole and David. Both of them had heard it too, their faces reflecting the same shock I felt. That was your voice, Cole said. But you didn't... I know. The radio crackled again. My voice. It's cold down here. Then another voice, male, unfamiliar. Stay quiet. It can hear us. And a third voice, also male. I can't feel my legs. Multiple voices now, overlapping. Some speaking in clear sentences, others just fragments of words. A woman's voice. The light showed me the way. A child's voice singing a nursery rhyme. An older man reciting numbers in a monotone. All of them emerging from that single anomalous frequency. All of them sounding wrong, like recordings played at slightly the wrong speed. David grabbed his own radio and tried to transmit on that frequency. This is Ranger David Marsh. Identifying yourself. Who is broadcasting on this channel? The voices stopped. Just like that, instant silence. We waited, but they didn't come back. The frequency was dead, just empty static. What the hell was that? David asked, his voice shaky. Leah, that was your voice. How is that possible? I don't know. Some kind of recording. But how would anyone have recorded me, and why would they broadcast it here? Cole was checking the radio equipment, looking for any sign of malfunction or external interference. These aren't normal radios. They're encrypted, frequency hopping, military grade. You can't just intercept and play back signals from them. And that voice, those voices, they weren't coming through any normal transmission. It's like they were embedded in the static itself. We spent the next hour trying to recreate the phenomenon, scanning through frequencies, monitoring for any return of those voices. Nothing. The anomalous frequency stayed silent. But what we'd heard had been real, documented by our audio recorders, witnessed by all three of us. At Yo 400, I made a decision. I need to go down to the bottom level, alone. Both Cole and David immediately objected, but I cut them off. Think about it, the pattern. One ranger, alone, experiencing these phenomena. We changed that tonight by having 3 people here. Maybe that's why nothing else has happened. Maybe whatever this is, it needs someone to be isolated. Absolutely not, Cole said firmly. We're not splitting up. That's how people get hurt. I won't be alone. You'll both be right here, one level up. You can monitor me with the radios and I'll have a camera. If anything happens, you'll see it immediately. David looked at Cole. She might be right. Every incident involved a solo ranger. Our presence here could be preventing the full manifestation of whatever this is. Cole shook his head. I don't like it. I don't like it either, I said. But we came here to understand what's happening. This might be the only way. After 20 minutes of argument, Cole finally agreed, but only under strict conditions. I would wear a body camera with live feed to a monitor on the observation deck. I would keep an open radio channel, and at the first sign of anything unusual, I would immediately return upstairs. No exceptions. I geared up and descended to the bottom level, leaving Cole and David watching the monitor above. The storage level was cramped, filled with equipment, supplies, and maintenance gear. A single bulb provided minimal illumination, casting harsh shadows into the corners. I positioned myself near the base of the stairs where I had a clear view of both the external door and the stairway leading up. Radio check, I said. Cole's voice came back immediately. Reading you clearly. Video feed is good. How's the visibility down there? Limited. The light's not great, but I can see everything in the immediate area. Copy that. Starting timer. Remember, 30 minutes maximum. I settled in to wait, trying to control my breathing, trying not to think about Marcus and the others who'd vanished from this tower. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the tower settling and the soft static from my radio. At first, nothing happened. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I was beginning to think this was a wasted effort when I felt it. A drop in temperature. Sudden and sharp, enough to make me catch my breath. I could see it in the air, my exhalations becoming visible fog. Cole, temperature's dropping rapidly. We're seeing it on the sensors, down 12 degrees in the last 30 seconds. That's not natural. The light bulb flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. In that brief moment of darkness, I could have sworn I saw something move in the corner. A shadow that shouldn't have been there. I turned my flashlight toward it, but there was nothing, just boxes and equipment. Then I heard the breathing. Not over the radio, not from upstairs. Right there in the room with me, slow and labored, like someone struggling for air. I spun around, searching for the source. The breathing continued, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Leah, we're hearing it too, Cole said, his voice tense. Through your body camera. You need to come up now. Not yet. I need to understand. The breathing stopped. In its place came footsteps, the same metallic scraping I'd heard before, but this time they weren't coming up the stairs. They were coming down from above, descending from the observation deck, passing the middle level, coming straight toward me. But Cole and David were on the observation deck. I could hear them over the radio, could hear Cole calling my name, which meant someone, or something else, was on those stairs. I backed against the wall, shining my flashlight at the stairwell entrance. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I could see the stairs now, see them through the narrow opening. And there, descending into view, one step at a time, were wet footprints. Just the prints. No visible person making them. Just wet impressions appearing on each tread as if someone invisible was walking down. My training said to run. Every instinct screamed at me to get out of that confined space, to get back upstairs with Cole and David. But I was frozen, transfixed by the impossible sight of those footprints appearing out of nothing, walking down toward me. They reached the bottom of the stairs, stopped. I was staring at a wet footprint on the floor, maybe 6 feet from where I stood, pointing directly at me. The breathing started again, close enough that I should have been able to feel it, see it in the cold air. But there was nothing visible, just that sound and that single footprint. Then a voice, barely a whisper. "Follow the light." It was Marcus's voice. I recognized it from the few times I'd met him before his disappearance, that distinctive gravelly quality. But Marcus wasn't here. Marcus was in Oregon, living with his sister, trying to recover from whatever had happened to him. "Marcus?" I whispered back. "Follow the light," the voice repeated. "It shows the way." The way to what? But the presence, whatever it was, didn't answer. Instead, the external door, the one I'd locked when we arrived, began to rattle. Not violently, just a steady shaking like someone was testing it, trying to open it from the outside. Through the small window in the door, I could see light. That same steady glow I'd witnessed from the observation deck, but now it was right there, right outside, brilliant and cold. "Leah, get out of there now!" Cole's voice over the radio, urgent. I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted for the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, my flashlight beam bouncing crazily. Behind me, I heard the door crash open, felt a blast of frigid air, and heard that breathing intensify, becoming multiple voices, overlapping and echoing. I burst onto the middle level where Cole and David grabbed me, pulling me toward the stairs to the observation deck. "Go! Go! Go!" David shouted. We scrambled up to the top level, and Cole slammed the trap door that led down to the middle level, securing it with the locking mechanism. For a moment, we just stood there, breathing hard, listening. The sound of multiple voices continued below us, muffled now by the closed trap door, but definitely there. Speaking in languages I didn't recognize, saying things that might have been words or might have been just noise shaped like language. "Everyone okay?" Cole asked, checking us over. "Any injuries?" David and I shook our heads. We were shaken, but physically fine. Cole moved to the radio and reported our situation to base, requesting immediate backup. His voice was steady, professional, but I could see his hands shaking. The voices below were growing louder, and then we heard it. Footsteps on the stairs below the trap door, climbing toward us. Multiple sets now, not just one. The trap door began to rattle. "How strong is that lock?" David asked. "Not strong enough," Cole said. "It's designed to keep the heat in, not to keep out, whatever this is." I looked out the windows, searching for options. The fog had lifted slightly, and I could see the access road below, maybe 50 yards away. Help would be coming, but it would take time. Minimum 30 minutes for a team to reach us, probably longer given the conditions. "We need to buy time," I said. "Keep that door secured, and if it fails, we rappel down the outside of the tower." "In this fog, with no ground support?" David said. "That's almost as dangerous as whatever's down there." "Almost," I agreed, "but not quite." Cole was already pulling out rappelling gear from the emergency supplies. Leah's right. We rope up, and at the first sign that door's giving way, we go over the side. Better to take our chances with a controlled descent than with that. We worked quickly, setting up anchor points and preparing the ropes. The trap door continued to rattle, and now we could hear something else. Scratching, like fingernails on metal, circling the edges of the door, testing for weaknesses. "How long until backup arrives?" I asked. Cole checked his watch. "Estimated 22 minutes, but that's optimistic. The fog could slow them down." The scratching intensified. Then, abruptly, it stopped. The silence was somehow worse than the noise had been. We waited, weapons ready, flashlights pointed at the trap door. A voice came from below, clear and calm. My voice again. "Leah, open the door. I'm cold. I need help." "Don't respond," Cole warned. "Don't engage with it." But the voice continued, pleading now. "Please. I'm lost. I can't find my way. The light showed me something, but now I can't remember. Open the door. Help me remember." It was unsettling, hearing my own voice speaking words I'd never said, expressing thoughts I'd never had. But there was something else in that voice, something underneath the words. Pain. Real pain, and confusion, and fear. Whatever was down there, it wasn't just trying to trick us. It was genuinely suffering. Against my better judgment, I moved closer to the trap door. "Marcus, is that you? Are you down there?" The voice changed, became Marcus's again. "I followed the light, Leah. I did what it showed me, but now I'm stuck. We're all stuck. Help us." "We can't help if we don't understand," I said. "Tell us what happened to you." There was a long pause. Then, "The light appears in the fog. It shows us where to go, what to do. It promises understanding, promises to reveal the truth about this place. But when we follow it, we get lost. Not in space, but I don't know how to explain it. In time, maybe. Or between times. We're here, but we're also not here. Trapped in the spaces between." Cole was listening intently. "Marcus, if that's really you, tell us something only you would know. Your first assignment at the park, what was it?" A pause, then, "Trail maintenance on the Wonderland Trail, spring of 2011. My supervisor was Barbara Ortiz. I spent 3 weeks clearing deadfall after that big storm. I got poison oak on my left arm and had to take medication for it." Cole's face went pale. "That's correct. All of it." He moved closer to the door. "Marcus, how do we help you? How do we get you out of wherever you are?" "Don't follow the light," Marcus's voice said. "That's the first thing. Never follow it, no matter what it shows you. But for us, the ones already lost, I don't know, maybe we can't be helped. Maybe this is just where we exist now." Other voices joined in, overlapping. "Don't follow the light. Stay in the tower. Wait for dawn." A woman's voice. "The fog holds us. When it clears, we fade." A man's voice. "Tell my family I didn't mean to leave. Tell them I'm sorry." "How many of you are there?" I asked. "All of us," the voices said in unison. "Everyone who followed the light. We're all here, trapped in the fog, in the cold, in the spaces between." David had been monitoring our equipment during this exchange. He now spoke up. "The environmental sensors are showing something weird. The temperature differential between inside the tower and directly below us is over 40 degrees. It's like there's a pocket of extreme cold right beneath the trap door." "The cold is where we are," Marcus's voice explained. "It's part of the space we occupy. When we try to reach back to your world, to warn others, we bring the cold with us. We don't mean to frighten anyone. We just don't want anyone else to end up here." A new voice. One I didn't recognize. "The light isn't evil, it's just confused. It doesn't understand that we're not like it, that we can't exist in the spaces it inhabits. It thinks it's helping, showing us something beautiful. But for us, it's a trap." "What is the light?" Cole asked. What causes it? We don't know, multiple voices responded. It's old. It was here before the tower, before the park, maybe before humans ever came to this mountain. It's part of the place itself, the mountain's awareness made visible. It shows itself in the fog because that's when the boundary is thinnest, when it can reach through from wherever it exists. I thought about all the research I'd done, all the historical records. The indigenous people who lived here, they had stories about lights on the mountain. Were they seeing the same thing? Yes, the voices confirmed. They understood better than we do. They knew not to follow, knew the lights were beautiful but dangerous. They respected the boundary. We didn't. We were curious. We wanted to understand. We thought we could study it scientifically. But some things don't fit into scientific frameworks. Some things exist in ways we can't measure or categorize. Cole checked his watch again. Backup's 10 minutes out. Marcus, if we can't help you, what should we do? How do we prevent this from happening to others? Close the tower, Marcus said. Mark this area as dangerous. Don't let anyone stay here alone overnight, especially during fog. And if someone does see the light, if they feel the pull to follow it, they need to understand what they're risking. Make it clear. Make people believe. We will, I promised. I swear, we'll make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. The scratching on the trap door had stopped. The voices were fading, becoming fainter, like they were moving away. Marcus spoke one last time. Thank you. For listening, for believing. It's easier, knowing someone understands. Tell my family, tell them I'm okay. It's not bad here, just different, just lonely. We'll tell them, Cole said, his voice thick with emotion. The presence below us faded completely. The temperature began to rise, and the oppressive feeling of being watched lifted. By the time backup arrived 10 minutes later, storming up the stairs with weapons drawn and emergency equipment ready, the tower was completely normal. No voices, no cold spots, no wet footprints. Just 3 rangers, shaken but unharmed, surrounded by documentation equipment and evidence of something that most people would never believe. The official report was carefully worded. We described the anomalous lights, the temperature fluctuations, the audio phenomena. We included all our photographic and video evidence, all the sensor readings, everything we'd documented. But we left out the voices, the conversation with Marcus, the description of people trapped in spaces between. Some things, we agreed, would only hurt the credibility of the rest of our findings. Cole made good on his promise to Marcus. Cascade Lookout was officially closed for structural concerns requiring extensive evaluation. That was technically true. The phenomena we'd documented did represent a safety concern, even if not in the traditional sense. The tower was mothballed, locked, and removed from the rotation of active fire lookouts. As far as I know, no one has spent a night there since. I met with Marcus 3 weeks later, drove down to Oregon with Cole to see him. He was living in a small apartment, working part-time at a hardware store, getting by. When we told him about our experience, about what we'd heard, he broke down. It was the first confirmation he'd had that what happened to him was real, that he hadn't imagined the whole thing. I can still feel it sometimes, he said. That pull, like part of me is still there, still trapped in that space. But it's getting better. The further I am from the mountain, the less I feel it. Would you ever go back? I asked. He shook his head emphatically. Never. That place has enough of me already. I'm not giving it any more. We gave him copies of our documentation, proof that he wasn't crazy, that something real had happened. I don't know if it helped, but at least he knew he wasn't alone in experiencing it. Dr. Helen Voss, the park psychologist, was brought in to review our findings. She listened to everything, reviewed all the evidence, and gave her professional opinion. What you experienced was real, but its nature remains unclear. It could be environmental factors creating shared perceptual phenomena. It could be something else. Either way, the psychological impact on personnel is significant and well documented. The decision to close the tower was correct. That was as close to official validation as we were going to get, and honestly, it was enough. We'd documented the phenomena, we'd closed the tower, and we'd ensured that no one else would be put in that situation. That's what mattered. I still work at Mount Rainier, but I requested a transfer to day shifts only. No more night watches, no more solo overnight assignments. Cole approved it immediately, and I don't think anyone was surprised. After what we'd experienced, after what we'd learned, the idea of being alone in the darkness, watching for lights that might appear in the fog, I couldn't do it anymore. Sometimes, late at night, I think about Marcus and the others. Still trapped somewhere in those spaces between, existing in a state we can barely comprehend. I wonder if they're aware of time passing, if they experience anything like what we would call consciousness, or if they've become something else entirely, transformed by their existence in that strange cold realm. And I think about the light itself, that thing the indigenous people understood better than we ever could. Is it still there, still appearing in the fog, still showing its beautiful, terrible path to anyone who might be watching? Or has it moved on, found other places where the boundary is thin, other opportunities to make contact with creatures like us who are too curious for their own good? I don't know. I don't think I'll ever know. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some doors aren't meant to be opened. Some lights aren't meant to be followed. The tower still stands, locked and empty, a monument to everyone who got lost trying to understand it. The official records say it's closed for structural concerns. The real reason is filed away in a secure database, accessible only to senior park staff and a handful of researchers who specialize in anomalous phenomena. Will it ever be reopened? I doubt it. There are some places humans just shouldn't be, especially alone, especially at night. I drive past Cascade Lookout sometimes, usually during the day when the sun is bright and the fog is just a distant memory. From the road, it looks peaceful, almost picturesque. Just an old fire tower on a mountain, like dozens of others throughout the park system. You'd never know what happened there. You'd never guess what might still be happening there during those foggy nights when the boundary grows thin. But I know. Cole knows. David knows. And Marcus knows, better than any of us. We carry that knowledge with us, that understanding that the world is stranger than most people realize, that there are spaces between spaces, times between times, and things that exist in ways we can't fully comprehend. The mountain keeps its secrets. It always has, and it always will. And maybe that's how it should be. Maybe some things are better left mysterious, better left unexplained. Maybe the real wisdom isn't in understanding everything, but in knowing when to stop asking questions, when to accept that some answers are more dangerous than the questions themselves. I still love this place. Despite everything, or maybe because of everything, I still feel connected to this mountain, to these forests, to the work we do here. But I'm more careful now, more aware. I know that nature isn't just trees and rocks and weather patterns. It's also the things we can't see, can't measure, can't predict. The things that exist in the fog and the darkness, in the spaces we don't usually think about. And on foggy nights when the visibility drops and the world becomes muffled and strange, I make sure I'm indoors. I make sure I'm not alone. And if I happen to see lights moving through the trees, lights that don't quite behave like normal light should, I look away. I don't investigate. I don't follow. Because I learned what Marcus learned, what all the others learned too late. Some invitations aren't meant to be accepted. Some paths aren't meant to be walked. And some lights, no matter how beautiful they seem, no matter what they promise to show you, should never, ever be followed. The mountain waits. The fog comes and goes, and somewhere, in the spaces between, they're all still there. All the ones who followed the light, who wanted to understand, who thought they could bridge the gap between our world and whatever exists in those cold, strange places. I hope they've found some kind of peace. I hope they're not suffering. But mostly, I hope their story serves as a warning, a reminder that curiosity has limits, that understanding has costs, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply walk away from a mystery unsolved. The tower is closed. The pattern is broken, and that's enough. It has to be enough. Because the alternative, the possibility that it might happen again, that someone else might see the light and make that same fatal decision to follow it, is too terrible to contemplate. We did what we could. We documented, we warned, we closed the tower. The rest is up to the mountain, to whatever force creates those lights, to the fog that holds the lost ones in its cold embrace. I still work here. I still protect this place and the people who visit it. But I do it with my eyes a little more open, my awareness a little sharper, my understanding a little deeper. And on foggy nights, I stay inside. That's the real lesson of Cascade Lookout. Know when to stay inside. Know when to look away. Know when the price of understanding is too high to pay. The mountain will still be here long after I'm gone. The lights will still appear in the fog. And somewhere, in spaces we can't reach and shouldn't try to, they'll still be waiting. All the ones who followed the light. But there won't be any more. Not if I can help it. Not on my watch. There's something about fog on a mountain that plays tricks on your mind. It doesn't just obscure your vision, it distorts sound, warps distance, makes you question what's real and what's imagined. After 4 years of volunteer search and rescue work on Mount Rainier, I'd learned to trust my instincts over what my eyes told me. But sometimes, even instincts can lead you astray when the mountain decides to test you. My name is Naomi Reeves, and I've spent more nights on this mountain than I care to count. Not by choice exactly, but because when someone goes missing at 10,000 feet, you don't get to wait for better conditions. You go, you search, and you hope you find them before the cold does. The call came in just before 09:30 on a Thursday morning in late October. I was at the ranger station, checking equipment with Adrian Blake, our team's medic and the person I'd trust with my life in a crisis. Adrian had been doing wilderness medicine for over a decade, had that calm, unshakable demeanor that made everyone around him feel safer. We'd worked maybe 30 rescues together, developed the kind of silent communication that only comes from shared danger. A single climber reported down on Eagle's Nest Ridge, Rachel Moss announced from the radio desk. Her voice was steady, professional, but I caught the tension underneath. Eagle's Nest was one of the nastier sections of the park. Technical terrain, loose rock, and exposure that made experienced climbers nervous. GPS coordinates putting him at approximately 10,200 feet. Name's Kyle Foster, age 32, solo climber. His emergency beacon activated about 20 minutes ago. Adrian was already moving toward the gear room. Weather? Rachel pulled up the data on her screen. Deteriorating fast. Heavy fog rolling in, visibility dropping to 50 feet or less. Winds picking up, gusting to 30 miles per hour. We've got maybe a 3-hour window before conditions become too dangerous for helicopter support. 3 hours. That was tight, especially on Eagle's Nest. I grabbed my pack, started loading technical rescue equipment. Rope, carabiners, medical supplies, emergency shelter. Everything you might need when you didn't know what you were walking into. "What's Foster's experience level?" I asked Rachel. She was scrolling through the permit records. "Extensive, according to his application. Multiple ascents of Rainier, plus climbs in Alaska and the Cascades. He filed a detailed route plan, had all the proper equipment listed. Everything looked good on paper." That's what worried me. Experienced climbers didn't usually trigger emergency beacons unless something had gone seriously wrong. A fall, equipment failure, sudden medical emergency. None of the options were good. The helicopter ride took 15 minutes, with Sam Hendricks at the controls, navigating through increasingly thick fog. Through the window, I watched the mountain disappear into gray nothingness, the kind of complete obscurity that made me grateful for GPS technology. "Best I can do is get you within a quarter mile," Sam said, his voice crackling through the headset. "Fog's too thick for a closer approach. You'll have to hike in from there." We landed on a relatively flat section of ridge at 9,800 feet. The moment we stepped out of the helicopter, the fog swallowed us. Sam lifted off immediately. Staying grounded in these conditions was asking for trouble, and suddenly Adrian and I were alone in the gray silence. "Radio check," I said, keying my handset. Rachel's voice came back clear. "Reading you 5 by 5. Foster's beacon is still active, bearing 035 degrees from your position, approximately 0.4 miles. Be careful out there." "Copy that." Adrian and I started climbing. The terrain was brutal, loose scree mixed with solid rock, everything slick with moisture from the fog. Visibility was exactly as bad as Rachel had warned, maybe worse. I could barely see Adrian when he was more than 10 feet ahead of me. We climbed in silence, conserving energy and breath, pausing every few minutes to check our bearings against the GPS. The fog created an eerie acoustic effect, sounds seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. At one point, I could have sworn I heard someone calling for help, but when we stopped to listen, there was nothing but wind. "You hear that?" Adrian asked, proving I hadn't imagined it. "Yeah, probably just the wind playing tricks. This fog does weird things to sound." But it unsettled me, that phantom voice. Made me more alert, more on edge. We reached Foster's GPS coordinates at 1100 hours. The beacon was here, we could hear its rhythmic beeping, but there was no sign of Foster. What we found instead was a climbing rope, tied to an anchor point on a large boulder, disappearing over the edge of a steep drop-off. Adrian approached the edge carefully, testing the stability of the rock beneath him. Looks like he was rappelling down this section, ropes still in place, which is strange. If he fell, the rope should show signs of that. I moved to examine the anchor point while Adrian checked the edge. The rope was secured with a figure 8 knot. Textbook perfect. I ran the rope through my hands, feeling for wear, for heat damage, for anything that might explain what happened. The rope was high quality, well maintained, showing normal wear patterns consistent with regular use, but something nagged at me. I looked closer at the knot, at the rope fibers inside the bight. Then I pulled out my headlamp for better visibility in the gray light, examining the knot with the kind of attention to detail that 4 years of climbing had taught me. The fibers inside the knot were too bright, not compressed or darkened the way they should be if the knot had been under significant load. I'd tied thousands of figure 8s in my climbing career, had seen what they looked like after supporting a climber's weight. This wasn't it. "Adrian," I called out, "come look at this." He moved away from the edge, came over to where I was examining the rope. What am I looking at? This knot, the rope fibers inside aren't compressed. See how bright they are? A knot that's been weighted properly should show darkening fiber compression. This looks like it was tied within the last hour or two and never actually used." Adrian's expression shifted from curious to concerned. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be, this knot hasn't supported anyone's weight, which means either Foster didn't use this rope, or—" I didn't finish the sentence. The implications were troubling. "Or someone else tied it after Foster disappeared," Adrian completed. "But who? The permit records showed him as solo. Let's check the rest of the area. Maybe there's something we're missing." We searched in an expanding circle from the rope, looking for any sign of Foster or indication of what had happened. The fog made it slow going. We had to stay within visual contact with each other to avoid getting separated. After 20 minutes of searching, I found something. Blood. Not a lot, just a few drops on a rock about 30 feet from the rope. Fresh enough to still be liquid, not yet dried despite the cold. "Adrian, over here." He joined me, knelt to examine the blood. "That's recent, within the last few hours." He pulled out a sample kit, carefully collected evidence. So, Foster was injured. Question is, how badly and where is he now? I was scanning the ground, looking for more blood, for tracks, for anything. The fog made everything look flat and featureless, but years of tracking experience helped me spot the subtle disturbances. There, a scuff mark in the thin layer of moisture coating the rocks, and there, another one, leading away from the blood spot. "He went this way," I said, pointing. "Or someone did." We followed the trail, such as it was. In the fog, tracking became an exercise in patience and attention to detail. Every few yards I'd find another small sign. A disturbed rock, a partial boot print in a patch of dirt, another spot of blood. Whoever had come this way was injured and moving erratically. The trail led us along the ridge, parallel to the drop-off where the rope hung. We'd gone maybe 100 yards when I saw it. A shape in the fog ahead, dark and human-sized. "There," I said quietly. We approached cautiously. It was a person, sitting slumped against a rock, head down, not moving. I couldn't tell if they were conscious. "Kyle Foster," Adrian called out. "This is Mountain Rescue. We're here to help." No response. We got closer, and I could see now that it was indeed a man, wearing climbing gear consistent with what Foster's permit had listed. But something was off about the way he was positioned. Too still, too controlled for someone who was injured and in distress. Adrian reached him first, professional instincts taking over. He knelt beside the figure, checked for a pulse at the neck. I watched his expression change from concern to confusion. "He's hypothermic," Adrian said. "Body temperature is way down, pulse is weak and slow. But Naomi, look at this." He gestured to the man's clothing. It was torn in several places, showing signs of a fall or struggle. But the tears were wrong, too clean, too deliberate. And despite the blood we'd tracked, despite the supposed injury, there were no visible wounds on the man's exposed skin. "This doesn't make sense," I said. "The blood trail, the torn clothing, but no injuries? And there's more." Adrian pointed to the man's feet. "His boots. Look at the soles." I leaned in to see what he meant. The boot soles were clean, almost pristine. No mud, no scuff marks from climbing, barely any wear at all. These boots hadn't just climbed up 10,000 feet of mountain in difficult conditions. They looked like they'd barely been used. "Adrian, I think we need to call this in," I said, my unease growing. "Something's very wrong here." He nodded, already reaching for his radio. "Rachel, this is Blake. We've located what we believe is Kyle Foster, but the situation is unusual. Subject is severely hypothermic, showing signs of exposure and possible injuries, but the physical evidence doesn't match the condition we're finding him in. Requesting guidance." There was a pause before Rachel responded. "Can you elaborate on unusual?" Adrian glanced at me, and I could see he was trying to figure out how to explain what we were seeing without sounding crazy. The subject's gear and clothing show signs of trauma, but there are inconsistencies in the evidence pattern. The rope at the original beacon location appears to have been staged. We found blood evidence leading to the subject's location, but no corresponding injuries, and the subject's footwear is inconsistent with having climbed to this altitude. Another pause, longer this time, then, "Stand by." While we waited for guidance, I continued examining the scene. Foster, if this was Foster, hadn't moved or responded to our presence. His breathing was shallow, his skin pale and cool to the touch. Classic signs of severe hypothermia. But how had he gotten this way? The temperature wasn't that extreme, maybe low 30s Fahrenheit. Cold, yes, but not life-threatening for someone properly dressed, which Foster appeared to be. Unless he'd been out here much longer than his beacon activation suggested. But that didn't match either. The blood I'd tracked was fresh. The beacon had only been active for about 2 hours. Nothing added up. "Naomi," Adrian said quietly, "I need you to help me with something. I want to check his pack." We carefully removed Foster's backpack. It was a quality climbing pack, the kind serious mountaineers used. Adrian opened it methodically, documenting everything with his helmet camera as he went. Inside were the usual supplies: water, energy bars, a first aid kit, extra clothing layers, a headlamp, all the things you'd expect, but also things you wouldn't expect. A second emergency beacon, still in its package, never activated. A climbing harness with tags still attached, brand new. And most disturbing, a wallet containing an ID for Kyle Foster, but also credit cards and a driver's license in a completely different name, Marcus Riley. "Who is Marcus Riley?" I asked, though I already knew the answer was going to complicate things. Adrian was taking photos of the IDs. "I don't know, but we're going to find out. Rachel, we've got a significant development. The subject we've located may not be who we think he is. We're finding multiple forms of identification." Rachel's response was immediate. "Say again?" "The subject has ID for Kyle Foster, but also for someone named Marcus Riley. We also have evidence of unused brand-new gear mixed with used equipment. Requesting you run both names through the database and contact law enforcement. This may not be a rescue situation." "Copy that. Stand by for instructions." Adrian and I moved a short distance away from the unconscious man, far enough that we could talk without being overheard if he were faking his condition, which was beginning to seem possible. "What do you think is going on?" Adrian asked quietly. "I don't know, but nothing about this adds up. The staged rope, the fake beacon location, the mixed identities, the inconsistent evidence. It's like someone wanted us to find this scene, but they didn't think through all the details. Or they did think through the details, and we're just not seeing the full picture yet." That was an unsettling thought. If this was deliberate, if someone had gone to the trouble of creating this elaborate scenario, what was the endgame? What were they trying to accomplish? Rachel came back on the radio. "Okay, here's what I've got. Kyle Foster is a registered climber with permits for today. No red flags on his background. But Marcus Riley is interesting. He was reported missing 3 weeks ago from Seattle. Last seen heading to the mountains for a solo climb. The missing persons report is still active. So, which one is he?" I asked. "That's what we need to figure out. Law enforcement is en route. ETA approximately 90 minutes. In the meantime, they want you to secure the scene, maintain visual contact with the subject, and don't let him leave if he regains consciousness." "Copy that," Adrian confirmed. "What about medical treatment? He's genuinely hypothermic." "Treat as needed to stabilize, but be careful. Until we know who he is and what's going on, consider him potentially dangerous. Adrian pulled emergency blankets from his medical kit, carefully wrapped them around the unconscious man. Whatever else was happening, we couldn't just let someone die of hypothermia, but we stayed alert, stayed ready for anything. The fog showed no signs of clearing. If anything, it was getting denser. The temperature was dropping too, and I could feel the cold seeping through my layers. We'd been on the mountain for over 2 hours, and the 3-hour window Rachel had mentioned was closing fast. "We're going to need extraction soon," I said. "Weather's not improving." Adrian checked his watch. "Yeah, we've got maybe another hour before we have to make a call about staying or evacuating." That's when the man moved. Just a twitch at first, then his eyes opened. He looked around, disoriented, focused on us. And in that moment, I saw something in his expression that made my blood run cold. Not confusion, not fear, recognition, and calculation. "Thank God you found me," he said, his voice hoarse but controlled. "I thought I was going to die out here." Adrian moved into medic mode instinctively, professional training overriding suspicion. "Try not to move too quickly. You're hypothermic. What's your name?" The man hesitated, just a fraction of a second. "Kyle. Kyle Foster. What happened? I remember climbing, and then, I don't know. Everything's fuzzy." I watched his face carefully as he spoke. The hesitation, the slight shift in his eyes when he said the name. He was lying. I was almost certain of it. But why? "Kyle, can you tell us what you remember about today?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "You activated your emergency beacon. What happened before that?" "I was climbing along the ridge. There was a difficult section. I was setting up a rappel, and then—" He touched his head, wincing. I must have hit my head. That's all I remember. "You don't remember setting up the rope?" Adrian pressed. "The anchor point we found?" "No, like I said, everything after that point is blank." I pulled out my phone, showed him the photo of the IDs we'd found. "Can you explain why you have identification for Marcus Riley in your pack?" His expression didn't change, which was impressive. Either he was an excellent actor or he'd been expecting this question. "Marcus Riley? I don't know anyone by that name. Maybe it's from a wallet I found? I sometimes pick up lost items on trails, turn them into rangers." It was a plausible lie, delivered smoothly, but it didn't explain why a missing person's ID would be in his pack, or why his emergency beacon had led us to a staged rope scene. Adrian's radio crackled. "Blake, this is Rachel. Update on your subject's identity. We pulled photos from both Kyle Foster's climbing permits and the missing persons report for Marcus Riley, sending them to your phone now." Adrian's phone buzzed. He opened the images, compared them to the man sitting in front of us. His expression tightened. "Naomi, look at this." I moved closer, looked at the screen. The two photos were similar, same general build, same coloring, but they were definitely different people. Kyle Foster had a slightly wider face, different nose shape. Marcus Riley's features were sharper, more angular. The man in front of us looked like Marcus Riley. "So you're not Kyle Foster," I said, not making it a question. "You're Marcus Riley. Want to tell us why you're using someone else's identity and emergency beacon?" For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his whole demeanor changed. The pretense of confusion dropped, replaced by something harder, more calculating. "You wouldn't understand." "Try us," Adrian said. Riley, because that's who he was, looked between us, seemed to be weighing his options. Foster owed me money, a lot of money. He scammed me in a business deal, took everything I had. I've been trying to find him for months, but he kept moving, kept hiding. Then I found out he had a climbing permit for today. Thought I could catch him up here, get him to pay me back. "Where is Kyle Foster?" I asked. the question that had been nagging at me since we found the staged rope. I don't know. He never showed up. I waited at the trailhead all morning, but he didn't come. So I used his permit to come up here myself. Thought maybe he'd gone ahead early, but I couldn't find him anywhere. Why activate his emergency beacon? Adrian asked. I got lost. The fog rolled in. I couldn't find my way back, and I panicked. I knew if I activated the beacon, someone would come find me. I didn't think about the consequences. I just wanted off this mountain. It was a story that almost made sense, but there were still too many holes. That doesn't explain the staged rope, the blood evidence, or why you have brand new gear mixed with used equipment. Riley's expression shifted again, from calculation to something like fear. What blood evidence? I didn't stage anything. I'm telling you, I just got lost and needed help. Adrian and I exchanged glances. Either Riley was a better liar than I thought, or something else was going on. Something we hadn't figured out yet. Rachel's voice came through the radio again. All units, be advised. We just received a second emergency beacon activation. Different frequency, different location. Coordinates are approximately 0.6 miles northeast of your position. My stomach dropped. Rachel, what name is on the second beacon? Kyle Foster. Adrian was already on his feet. That's not possible. Foster's beacon is right here. He picked up the beacon we'd found at the first rope site, confirmed it was still active. I'm reading two separate beacons, both registered to Kyle Foster. Either he's carrying two beacons, or someone else has his second beacon. Or, I said slowly, the real Kyle Foster is out there somewhere, and whoever activated the first beacon isn't Foster at all. Riley had gone pale. That's impossible. I had Foster's beacon. I took it from his gear before I came up here. There shouldn't be a second one. You took his beacon? Adrian's voice had gone cold. From where? His car? His house? His apartment. I broke in last week, went through his climbing gear, took the beacon so I could track where he went climbing. But if he has a second beacon, that means... Riley trailed off. The implications hitting him. That means you broke into someone's home, stole their equipment, and impersonated them on a climb, I finished. That's burglary at minimum, possibly identity theft. But I didn't hurt anyone. I just wanted to find him, to talk to him. Where exactly did you go in Foster's apartment? Adrian asked. What else did you take or see? Just the beacon and his climbing schedule. He had a calendar on his wall with all his planned climbs, but the beacon was right there with his gear. I assumed it was his only one. Rachel came back on the radio. The second beacon is still active, holding position, but there's another complication. We just got a call from Seattle PD. A wellness check was requested on Kyle Foster's apartment 3 days ago. The officer who responded found signs of a break-in, but no sign of Foster. The apartment was empty. 3 days ago, I repeated. Marcus, when did you break into Foster's apartment? Last week, Wednesday, I think. The place was empty. Foster wasn't home. And you didn't think it was strange that all his climbing gear was just sitting there? That he wasn't home? He climbs all the time. I figured he was out on one of his trips. Adrian looked at me, and I could see the same growing concern in his eyes. Naomi, if Foster went missing from his apartment, if there was a break-in, and now his beacon is active somewhere on this mountain, then we're not looking at a simple case of mistaken identity or financial dispute, I finished. We might be looking at something much worse. Rachel's voice cut through. Law enforcement is 20 minutes out. They want you to hold position with Riley until they arrive, but they also want you to investigate the second beacon location if you feel it's safe to do so. Adrian checked our remaining supplies, looked at the weather. Fog's getting worse. We've got maybe an hour before visibility becomes 0. If we're going to check the second beacon, we need to decide now. I thought about the scenarios we were facing. Marcus Riley was here, alive and relatively stable despite the hypothermia. But Kyle Foster, the real Foster, was somewhere out there with an active emergency beacon. If he was injured, if he needed immediate help, every minute mattered. We can't wait for law enforcement, I said. If Foster's hurt, an hour could be the difference between life and death. One of us needs to stay with Riley, the other checks the second beacon. I'll stay, Adrian said immediately. You're faster on technical terrain, and you've got more climbing experience. Take a radio, check in every 15 minutes. If you're not back in 45 minutes, I'm coming after you. I grabbed a light pack, extra rope, medical supplies. Marcus, if you're lying about any of this, if you've done something to Kyle Foster, now's the time to tell us. Because when I find him, the truth is going to come out. Riley's face had gone from pale to ashen. I swear, I didn't do anything to him. I never even saw him. I just wanted my money back. Then where is he? How does he have a second beacon active if you stole his first one? I don't know. Maybe he bought a backup, maybe someone else is out here. That last possibility sent a chill through me. Someone else. But who and why? I checked my GPS, programmed in the coordinates of the second beacon. It was northeast, which meant moving along the ridge into even more technical terrain. The fog was so thick now I could barely see 15 feet ahead. 45 minutes, Adrian reminded me. Not 1 minute longer. Copy that. I left them there. Riley wrapped in emergency blankets. Adrian standing guard with his medical kit and a radio. The fog swallowed them within seconds, and I was alone on the mountain, moving toward coordinates that might lead to answers or might lead to more questions. The terrain got worse as I climbed. The rocks were loose, slick with moisture, and the exposure was significant. One wrong step and I'd tumble down a slope I couldn't even see through the fog. But I kept moving, checking my GPS every few yards, following the signal toward the second beacon. 15 minutes in, I radioed back. Adrian, I'm approximately halfway to the target coordinates. Terrain is challenging but manageable. How's Riley? Stable, warming up. Still claiming he doesn't know where Foster is. How's visibility? Terrible. I can barely see my own feet, but the beacon signal is strong. I'm getting close. I continued climbing, and the fog did something strange. It thinned slightly, just enough that I could see maybe 30 feet ahead, and what I saw made me stop cold. There was a tent. A small, solo mountaineering tent, pitched on a relatively flat section of ridge. The fabric was moving slightly in the wind, and I could see a light inside. Someone was in there. Adrian, I've got visual on a tent at the beacon coordinates. Looks like someone's inside, moving in to investigate. Be careful. We still don't know what we're dealing with. I approached the tent slowly, watching for any signs of danger, any indication that this might be a trap. But everything looked peaceful, normal, just a climber camping in challenging conditions. "Hello?" I called out. "Mountain Rescue, is anyone in there?" A rustling sound from inside. Then the tent zipper opened and a man's face appeared. 30s, weathered from sun and wind with tired eyes that widened when they saw me. "Thank God," he said. "I didn't think anyone would come. The beacon, I activated it hours ago." "Are you Kyle Foster?" I asked. "Yes. How did you know? Did someone report me missing?" I felt reality shift around me. Kyle Foster was here, alive. Which meant everything we'd pieced together in the last 2 hours was based on false assumptions. Marcus Riley had stolen a beacon and impersonated Foster, but Foster himself had been up here the whole time, apparently unaware of any of it. "Mr. Foster, we need to talk. But first, Are you injured? Do you need immediate medical attention? I'm okay, just exhausted. I got caught in the fog, decided it was safer to set up camp and wait for visibility to improve rather than risk climbing in these conditions. But my beacon activated accidentally when I was setting up the tent. I tried to deactivate it, but the mechanism jammed. I figured someone would come eventually. An accidental activation. The simplest explanation, and probably the correct one. But it didn't explain everything else we'd found. Kyle, I need to ask you something. Did you have 2 emergency beacons with you today? He looked confused. 2? No, just the one. Why would I need 2? Because someone activated a beacon with your registration about 2 hours ago, half a mile from here. And when we investigated, we found a man claiming to be you, but who's actually someone named Marcus Riley. Foster's expression went from confused to alarmed. Marcus Riley? He's here? On the mountain? You know him? He's been harassing me for months, claiming I owe him money from a business deal, but it's all in his head. There was never any deal, never any money. He's delusional, possibly dangerous. I filed a restraining order against him last month. The pieces were finally clicking into place. Riley hadn't just stolen a beacon. He'd stolen Foster's identity, his climbing schedule, everything, because he was obsessed with this supposed debt. And he'd come up here to confront Foster, not realizing Foster would be carrying a second beacon. Kyle, I need you to pack up your tent and come with me. There's a situation we need to resolve, and law enforcement is going to want to talk to you. What kind of situation? The kind that involves breaking and entering, identity theft, and possibly stalking. Marcus Riley is in custody about half a mile from here, and you're the victim of what looks like an escalating harassment campaign. Foster started breaking down his tent with shaking hands. I knew he was unstable, but I never thought he'd follow me up here. I came to this specific location because I thought I'd be safe, thought he wouldn't find me. How long have you been up here? Just since this morning. I started climbing at dawn, got up here around 10, and then the fog rolled in. I decided to wait it out rather than risk descending blind. Which meant Foster had been here, safe in his tent, the entire time we'd been investigating the fake beacon signal. Riley had created an entire emergency scenario, complete with staged rope and dramatic positioning, all to, what, get our attention? Force Foster to reveal himself? It was hard to follow the logic of someone who was clearly not thinking rationally. We packed up Foster's gear and started back toward where I'd left Adrian and Riley. The GPS coordinates led us back along the ridge, through the oppressive fog, back to reality and consequences. I can't believe he stole my beacon, Foster said as we climbed. That was in my apartment. He broke into my home. Seattle PD is aware. They responded to a wellness check 3 days ago and found signs of a break-in. That'll be part of the investigation. When we got back to Adrian's position, the scene was surreal. Marcus Riley, still wrapped in emergency blankets, looked up as we approached. When he saw Kyle Foster, his expression cycled through disbelief, anger, and finally resignation. "You," was all he said. "Marcus," Foster replied, his voice carefully controlled. "I have a restraining order against you. You're not supposed to be within 500 feet of me." "You owe me," Riley said. But there was no conviction in his voice anymore. Just exhaustion. The company, the investment, you took everything. There was no company, Marcus. There was no investment. We had one conversation at a conference about a business idea, and then you convinced yourself we were partners. I have the emails where I told you I wasn't interested. I have everything documented. Adrian looked at me, eyebrows raised. I filled him in quickly on what I'd found. Foster, safe in his tent, accidental beacon activation, no actual emergency, just one man's obsession spilling over into criminal behavior. The law enforcement helicopter arrived 10 minutes later, carrying 2 sheriff's deputies and a detective. We handed over Riley, provided statements, turned over all the physical evidence we'd collected. Foster gave his account, produced his restraining order, detailed months of increasingly concerning behavior from Riley. As they loaded Riley into the helicopter for transport down the mountain, he looked at Foster one last time. "I just wanted what was mine," he said quietly. "It was never yours," Foster replied. "And now you've lost everything, trying to claim something that didn't exist." The helicopter lifted off, disappearing into the fog with Riley and the deputies. That left Adrian, Foster, and me standing on the ridge, the fog pressing in around us, the temperature continuing to drop. "We need to get you down the mountain," Adrian said to Foster. "Can you walk, or do you need assistance?" "I can walk. I'm tired, but I'm okay." We started the descent, moving carefully through the fog. Foster explained more as we climbed down, how Riley had first contacted him 6 months ago, claiming they'd discussed a business venture at a tech conference. Foster had politely declined, but Riley persisted, his messages becoming more frequent and more aggressive. "He showed up at my office," Foster said, "then at my gym. Then he somehow got my address and started leaving notes on my car. That's when I got the restraining order. I thought that would be the end of it, but then I noticed things missing from my apartment. Small things at first, a USB drive, some papers. I thought I was just misplacing stuff, but then my emergency beacon disappeared from my climbing gear." "Why didn't you report the break-in?" I asked. "I did, but I didn't have proof it was him. The police took a report, but without evidence there wasn't much they could do. I started varying my routine, being more careful. When I planned this climb, I didn't tell anyone except my emergency contact, and I bought a second beacon because I was worried about the first one being compromised." "Smart thinking," Adrian said. "That second beacon probably saved your life. If we'd only responded to Riley's signal, we might never have known you were out here." We reached the staging area where the helicopter would pick us up by 1600 hours. The fog was finally starting to thin slightly, and I could see patches of mountain through gaps in the gray. Rachel had been coordinating everything from base, keeping law enforcement updated, arranging for Foster's extraction. "How did you know the rope was staged?" Foster asked me as we waited. "What gave it away?" "The knot," I said. The rope fibers inside the knot weren't compressed the way they should be after supporting weight. It's something you learn to see after years of climbing. Ropes tell stories if you know how to read them. A knot that looks perfect but hasn't been used is different from a knot that's done the job it's supposed to do. So Riley set up the rope, tied the knot, and what? Just waited for us to find him. Seems like it. My guess is he was trying to create a dramatic rescue scenario, thinking that would somehow force you to reveal yourself if you were on the mountain. He didn't count on us finding inconsistencies, or on you having a second beacon that would activate and expose his scheme. Adrian was shaking his head. The amount of planning that went into this is disturbing. Breaking into Foster's apartment, stealing the beacon, using his identity to get climbing permits, staging the rope scene. That's not impulsive behavior. That's calculated. He's been obsessing over this supposed debt for months, Foster said. I think he convinced himself that if he could just confront me in the right circumstances, I'd admit I owed him money. Reality stopped mattering to him somewhere along the way. The extraction helicopter arrived right on schedule, and we all climbed aboard. As we lifted off and the mountain dropped away beneath us, I thought about the search we'd just completed. We'd gone looking for one person and found two. We'd untangled a web of obsession and illusion, and we'd done it all in fog so thick you could barely see your own hands. Back at base, Rachel met us with coffee and questions. We did a full debrief, walking through every step of the search, every piece of evidence we'd found. The staged rope, the blood drops that had come from Riley cutting his hand while setting up his scene, the multiple IDs, Foster's accidental beacon activation. All of it fit together into a picture of one man's obsession spiraling into criminal behavior. "What happens to Riley now?" Foster asked. "He'll face charges for the break-in, the identity theft, the violation of the restraining order," Rachel explained. "Plus, potentially making false emergency calls, which ties up rescue resources. The DA will decide the exact charges, but he's looking at significant prison time." "I feel bad for him in a way," Foster said. "He clearly needs mental health help more than jail time." "Maybe he'll get both," Adrian said. "The court can mandate treatment as part of his sentence." Foster stayed at the ranger station for another hour, giving additional statements, making sure everything was documented properly. Before he left, he pulled me aside. "Thank you," he said, "for not just taking the obvious explanation, for digging deeper. If you hadn't noticed that the rope was wrong, if you just assumed Riley was me and treated it as a straightforward rescue, things could have gone very differently." "That's the job," I said. "Pay attention to details, question what doesn't make sense, and trust your training. Still, you probably saved my life today. If Riley had found me up there, if he'd confronted me while I was alone in that tent, I don't know what would have happened." I hadn't thought about it that way, but Foster was right. Riley had been desperate enough to break into someone's home, obsessive enough to stalk someone across months, and unstable enough to create an elaborate fake emergency. If he'd found Foster alone on the mountain, the confrontation could have turned violent. "I'm just glad you had that second beacon," I said, "and that you made the smart choice to wait out the fog rather than trying to descend in dangerous conditions." After Foster left, Adrian and I spent another hour organizing equipment, writing up our incident reports, making sure everything was documented properly. It was tedious work, but necessary. The details we recorded today might be crucial evidence in Riley's trial. "You know what bothers me about this whole thing?" Adrian said as we worked. "What's that?" "How close Riley came to getting away with it. If Foster hadn't had that second beacon, if you hadn't noticed the rope inconsistencies, we might have accepted Riley's story. We'd have treated him for hypothermia, gotten him off the mountain, and by the time anyone figured out he wasn't Kyle Foster, he could have disappeared." "You think that was his plan?" "Maybe. Or maybe he really was just trying to force a confrontation and didn't think beyond that. Mental obsession can make people do irrational things. They don't always have a clear endgame." I thought about that as we finished our reports. Obsession, delusion, the way reality can warp when you want something badly enough. Riley had wanted Foster to owe him money so desperately that he'd created an entire false narrative around it. And when Foster didn't cooperate with that narrative, Riley had escalated, his behavior becoming more extreme, more dangerous. "Do you think Foster was ever really in danger?" I asked. "Or was Riley just trying to scare him?" "Hard to say. Obsessive behavior can turn violent quickly, especially when the person feels cornered or desperate. Riley claimed he just wanted to talk, but he'd already crossed so many lines, breaking and entering, stalking, identity theft. Who's to say he wouldn't have crossed more?" It was an unsettling thought, and one I kept turning over in my mind as I drove home that evening. How many other Marcus Rileys were out there, their obsessions hidden until circumstances pushed them into action? How many other Kyle Fosters were trying to live their lives while being stalked by someone's delusions? 3 days later, I got a call from Detective Sarah Morrison, the investigator handling Riley's case. "I wanted to give you an update," she said. Riley's been charged with multiple felonies. His lawyer's trying to negotiate a psychiatric evaluation and treatment as part of a plea deal. How's that looking? Possible. The evidence is overwhelming, and Riley's not denying what he did. He's finally starting to acknowledge that there was no business deal, no debt. It's like breaking the obsession broke him. He's cooperating fully, expressing remorse. The judge might be sympathetic to mental health considerations. That's probably the best outcome, I said. He needs help more than punishment. Agreed, but he'll still face consequences. Even with psychiatric treatment, he's looking at jail time. You can't break into someone's home, stalk them, and create fake emergencies without answering for it. What about Foster? How's he doing? Better now that Riley's in custody. He's moved to a new apartment, changed his phone number, taking security precautions. He said he's going to keep climbing, though. Said he won't let Riley take that away from him. Good. The mountain shouldn't become a source of trauma because of one person's obsession. After I hung up with Detective Morrison, I sat for a while, thinking about the search, about what I'd learned. In 4 years of rescue work, I'd dealt with injuries, exposure, equipment failures, bad decisions, all the normal hazards of mountain rescue. But this had been different. This had been about reading people as much as reading equipment, about understanding psychology as much as understanding terrain. The rope had told me a story that day. The bright fibers in the knot, the lack of compression, the way everything looked perfect but wasn't. It had been a message written in technical details that only someone with years of experience would recognize. And reading that message had unraveled an entire scheme. I pulled out my climbing rope, the one I used for training and practice, ran it through my hands, feeling the texture, the slight stiffness from years of use. Tied a figure 8. Examined the way the fibers compressed inside the bight, the way the rope's color darkened where it bent. This rope had history written into its fibers. Every climb, every rappel, every time it had supported weight. Riley's staged rope had lacked that history. It had been a prop, not a tool. And that difference, subtle as it was, had been enough to expose the truth. The following week, Adrian and I were back on the mountain for a routine training exercise. We were teaching new SAR volunteers about technical rescue procedures, and I made sure to include a section on reading equipment for signs of use and wear. A rope isn't just a rope, I told the trainees. It's a record of everything it's been through. Learn to read that record, and you'll be able to spot when something doesn't match the story you're being told. One of the trainees, a young woman named Jennifer, asked, "Is that how you figured out the Riley case? By reading the rope?" Word had spread about the incident, as it always does in the small world of mountain rescue. Partly, I said. The rope was the first inconsistency I noticed, but it was just one piece. The clean boot soles, the brand new gear mixed with used equipment, the lack of injuries despite blood evidence, all of it added up to a picture that didn't match the story we were being told. How do you know when to trust your instincts versus when you're seeing patterns that aren't there? It was a good question, one I'd asked myself many times. You document everything. You take photos, you make notes, you gather physical evidence. Then you look at all of it together and see if it tells a consistent story. If it doesn't, if there are inconsistencies that can't be explained, that's when you dig deeper. We spent the rest of the day on practical exercises, teaching the volunteers how to evaluate scenes, document evidence, make decisions under pressure. It was good work, important work, preparing the next generation of rescuers for the challenges they'd face. At the end of the day, as we were packing up equipment, Jennifer approached me again. "Thanks for sharing your experience," she said. "I hope I never have to deal with something like what you found up there, but if I do, I'll remember what you taught us today." "That's all we can do," I said. Learn from each other's experiences, stay alert, and never stop questioning when something doesn't feel right. Adrian and I drove back to the station in comfortable silence. We'd worked together long enough that words weren't always necessary. But as we pulled into the parking lot, he said, "You ever think about how different this job is from what people expect?" "What do you mean?" "People think mountain rescue is about finding lost hikers and treating injuries. And it is, mostly. But sometimes it's also about reading knots and spotting inconsistencies and understanding human psychology. It's detective work as much as rescue work." "Yeah," I agreed. "But that's what makes it interesting. Every call is different. Every situation teaches you something new. Even the ones that aren't actual emergencies, especially those. Because they remind us to stay sharp, to not take anything at face value, to question our assumptions." That night, lying in bed, I thought about Kyle Foster alone in his tent, safe but unaware that half a mile away, someone was impersonating him, creating a false emergency in his name. I thought about Marcus Riley, his obsession consuming him until he couldn't tell reality from delusion. I thought about the rope, hanging from its anchor point, looking perfect but telling a story of deception to anyone who knew how to read it. The mountain doesn't lie. Equipment doesn't lie. But people do, for all sorts of reasons. Desperation, obsession, fear, greed. Our job in search and rescue isn't just to respond to emergencies. It's to understand what we're really responding to separate truth from fiction, to make sure we're helping the people who actually need help. The Riley case taught me that. And it's a lesson I carry with me now on every call, every search, every time someone activates a beacon and calls for help. I still respond with the same urgency, the same commitment to saving lives. But I also respond with awareness, with attention to detail, with an understanding that not everything is as it appears. Because sometimes the real rescue isn't pulling someone out of a crevasse or treating an injury. Sometimes it's seeing through the deception, finding the truth hidden in the details, and making sure justice is served along with mercy. The mountain will always be here, constant and unchanging. But the people who come to it bring their dramas, their conflicts, their deceptions. And as long as they do, there will be a need for people like me. People who can read ropes and spot inconsistencies. People who question stories that don't quite add up. People who understand that the most important tool in mountain rescue isn't a rope or a radio, but the ability to see clearly even when everything is obscured by fog.